November 2025. The sky, seemingly quiet, suddenly rang with an invisible bell that shook the entire world of astronomy. An urgent bulletin was issued from the International Space Observation Center in Geneva. Two cosmic objects never before recorded are simultaneously racing toward the Sunday. The news spread like an electronic storm, leaping across borders and languages, seeping into every corner of the globe. In that instant, humanity was stripped from its ordinary rhythm of life, forced to lift its head toward the vast heavens, where a secret was unfolding that could change history forever. At the center of this storm of news stood 3I divided by Atlas, an icy body glowing with an eerie green-blue hue, traveling at a speed that shattered the boundaries of every physics equation ever taught. People called it the third interstellar traveler, yet the name felt far too ordinary compared to the shock it carried. A single glance at the first raw images was enough to leave the human eye transfixed. A thin green streak like the blade of a knife cutting across the night sky, as if it did not come from nature at all but from some civilization that had chosen to send it deliberately. If it had been only 3I divided by Atlas, the world might not have been thrown so violently off balance. But what stunned everyone even more was the arrival of another visitor, an entirely new object, absent from any star chart ever drawn. It flared on the opposite side of the orbit, like a colossal phantom emerging from the black hole of oblivion. Two strangers, born from different realms of the cosmos, both aimed at a single destination: the Sun, the burning heart of this planetary system. Scientists, long accustomed to the cold language of numbers, confessed for the first time that they were afraid. By every statistical calculation, the odds of two alien cosmic bodies arriving together were only once in millions, tens of millions of years. And yet it was happening, right before our eyes, at a time when humanity was utterly unprepared. The bold letters of the first bulletin screamed, "Zero probability is unfolding. Why now?" A wave of astonishment rippled like a shockwave. NASA's conference rooms glowed all night. ESA in Europe opened emergency transmissions. In Japan, ancient radio stations broke their tradition of nighttime silence to broadcast urgent bulletins. Ordinary citizens, used to nothing more than meteor showers, poured out onto balconies, their eyes fixed on the black expanse above. Many saw nothing, yet they still sensed the abnormal. The air felt denser, the wind colder, and the silence of the sky made their hearts pound out of rhythm. On social media, a fever erupted. From New York to Cairo, from Hanoi to Buenos Aires, millions posted the same words: "Something is coming." No one knew exactly what, but everyone felt as if an invisible hand were pulling back the veil that had covered humanity's long millennia of calm. 3I divided by Atlas was no longer merely an astronomical object. It became the emblem of disruption, of a question suspended in the air that no one dared to answer. Was this truly a cosmic coincidence, or a message sent from a distant intelligence? In those first days of November, the world wore two faces. One face dazzled, gazing at that green light slicing across the heavens, beauty so mesmerizing it felt divine. And another face, hidden in quiet dread, realizing that such beauty might carry peril. For the universe has never gifted humankind anything without demanding a price. The scientists knew well, if the trajectory erred, even by the slightest shift, 3I divided by Atlas could turn into a bullet, piercing through space to unleash a tragedy far beyond any nuclear nightmare. Curiosity, anxiety, awe, all merged into a torrent of emotions surging within humanity's collective chest. And as night fell, as every eye turned skyward, the question echoed ceaselessly: why now? Why us? When the first wave of news had not yet subsided, sharper images began to surface. On the screens of observatories, 3I divided by Atlas appeared as an emerald green dagger of light, slender, but so cold it sent a chill down the spine. Its tail stretched millions of kilometers, thin as a thread of fire, yet sharp enough to make viewers feel as if it could slice the heavens open. Astronomers could not hide their trembling. It doesn't move like a random block of ice and rock. It speeds forward like something that knows exactly where it wants to go. And just it to them must have known me. While the world was still entranced by that streak of green light, from the opposite horizon, comet Seraph X suddenly flared into view. It was not green, but blazing silver, pouring brilliance across the western sky like an immense pair of wings unfurling. From Chile, telescopes recorded a breathtaking sight. Seraph X's tail spread outward, spanning nearly 1/6 of the night sky, a shimmering gash sweeping across the clouds. In Egypt, many who looked upward swore they were seeing an angel of ice and fire descending to earth. Two cosmic bodies, two opposites. One, a cold, solitary line of green light, arrow-straight and piercing. The other, a radiant silver glow, overflowing, resplendent. And yet, strangely, both had chosen November 2025 to appear, both racing toward the sun, as if they were dancers in a choreography written long before. That coincidence left humanity with a stabbing thought. This is no longer random. The latest trajectory calculations made the atmosphere even more tense. 3, I divided by Atlas, would pass near Mars's orbit in mid-month, just a few tens of millions of kilometers away, close enough that every satellite around the red planet had to revise its schedule. Seraph X, however, was expected to skim much nearer to Earth, at a distance of only about 40 million kilometers, a span that sounded vast, yet by cosmic standards was but the blink of an eye, a sidelong glance that could graze the atmosphere if error intruded. From that moment, curiosity turned to unease. Scientists gave interview after interview, but their voices shook. We have never witnessed such a coincidence in historical data. The probability is virtually zero. That statement spread quickly, trimmed by online communities into chilling headlines. 0% event, when the universe chooses us. Each keyword ignited yet another wave of dread. In the world's great cities, collective observation nights took shape. Hundreds of amateur stargazers crowded rooftops, vacant lots, and city parks with their telescopes. Through the eyepiece, they found the slender green shimmer of Atlas in the east, then turned west to behold Seraph X's blazing silver fire. The sensation left many breathless. Two strangers, advancing as if toward one another. Their meeting point the sun itself, burning at the center. In the press, some compared the vision to a destined rendezvous arranged by the cosmos. Others called it a galactic trap, warning that two objects of such apparent beauty could conceal unforeseen threats. For just one small shift in gravitational pull, just one random collision with another rock, could send Atlas or Seraph X careening, becoming a colossal bullet aimed straight at Earth. Religions, always sensitive to omens in the sky, began issuing proclamations. An imam in Turkey declared, "These are two angels sent down to test faith." A pastor in Brazil cried, "Pray, for when the two lights cross, a new age will be born." On philosophy forums, long essays multiplied, weaving Atlas into ancient myths of the star that heralds the end of days. And then the more unsettling questions began knocking at the doors of research centers. Why at the same time? Why in the year 2025, and not 50 years earlier, or 200 years later? Why one from interstellar space and the other from the Oort cloud of our own solar system, yet coinciding so precisely? The only answer anyone received was silence. Yet that very silence only fueled the imagination, only made fear more tangible. In the dim glow of control rooms, banks of computers churned out figures, orbits, velocities, luminosities, accurate to decimal after decimal. But what no formula could ever compute was the feeling humanity now endured. An inner upheaval, entranced by beauty, panicked by danger, desperate to unlock the riddle of the incomprehensible. In November 2025, the sky was no longer a silent backdrop. It had become a stage where 3I divided by Atlas and Seraph X played the starring roles in a drama for which humanity had no choice but to sit in the audience. And every gaze clung to their motions, breath held, waiting to see what would happen when those two streaks of light drew closer to the fiery heart of the solar system. Within only a few days, the twin appearance of 3I divided by Atlas and Seraph X had turned the entire planet into a giant emergency observatory. In Washington, NASA's main conference hall glowed through the night, colossal screens displaying orbital updates minute by minute. In Paris, ESA convened an extraordinary meeting, drawing dozens of experts from across Europe. China, usually secretive about astronomy, stunned the world by live-streaming a press conference that drew hundreds of millions of views. Japan and India were no exception. Both immediately announced they would reassign the priorities of their satellites to track the mysterious pair racing toward the Sunday. Yet the true upheaval was not in scientific halls, but in the way the global public reacted. billions of people were suddenly pulled into what felt like a collective nightmare. On Twitter, the hashtag number #2025 soared to the top of trends in less than 3 hours. TikTok flooded with spliced videos of the two blazing objects paired with pounding soundtracks, overlaid with captions, "Prepare for the apocalypse." On Facebook, thousands of private groups sprang up overnight, spreading theories that this was a message from the gods or evidence of an alien civilization probing humanity. Anxiety spilled into daily life. In Los Angeles, long lines formed outside supermarkets as people rushed to stock up on bottled water and canned food. In Tokyo, the wealthy began purchasing one-way tickets to remote islands, convinced that major cities would be the first targets if something happened. In Cairo, tens of thousands of Muslim faithful poured into the squares to pray through the night. In Rome, church bells tolled without pause like a funeral dirge, though no one dared to call it death. The unease thickened as the media failed to provide a clear explanation. Scientists, though holding endless streams of data, could only repeat the same phrase, "We don't know yet." Instead of calming the public, that answer fanned the flames of imagination. If the sharpest minds in the world could not comprehend it, then was this a sign of a power beyond human intelligence? The global psychological crisis reached its peak when a simulated video went viral on YouTube, depicting Seraph-X's trajectory, possibly bending toward Earth. The video was only hypothetical, yet the 3D rendering was so lifelike that millions believed it was real. Within 24 hours, the stock prices of airlines, food companies, and even personal weapons manufacturers skyrocketed. Psychologists labeled the phenomenon a galactic fever, a contagion of fear spreading faster than any epidemic. The great religions rushed to interpret. Some Christian pastors proclaimed, "Atlas is the sword of justice, Seraph-X, the wings of judgment. When they cross, Scripture will fulfill its prophecy." Some Buddhist monks spoke otherwise. "These lights are not destruction, but illumination. They force humanity to look inward, to see its own fragility." But whether omen of doom or blessing of vision, all agreed this was no accident. Meanwhile, governments came under mounting pressure. Citizens demanded transparency, but scientific reports contradicted one another. A team of astronomers in Berlin asserted the collision risk was zero, while another group in Moscow warned of a small but non-negligible danger. Those two words, non-negligible danger, were enough to sow terror in millions of already trembling hearts. And like a primitive reflex, conspiracy theories blossomed everywhere. Some believed Atlas was a spacecraft controlled by alien intelligence, dispatched to survey Earth. Others claimed that Seraph-X was, in truth, a cosmic weapon engineered by a superpower, disguised as a comet. More extreme voices declared that both objects were the signs of humanity's cycle ending, pre-programmed by the universe itself. Illogical as they were, such theories spread like wildfire because at least they offered an answer, however false, to a dread no one else could silence. In that climate, people no longer looked at the sky with wonder alone. They looked up with fear in their eyes, as if the green of Atlas and the silver of Seraph-X were casting light on their own fragile fate. November 2025 was slowly becoming the month when the entire planet sank into a half-crisis. Science not solid enough, religion not comforting enough, politics not reassuring enough, and everyone from the experts in laboratories to the child staring out a window was left to whisper the same question. If this is a sign, what is it a sign of? The 15th of November 2025, every telescope in the heavens turned toward Mars. At a distance of 30 million kilometers, 3I divided by Atlas slid across the crimson void like a spear hurled in silence. The satellites orbiting Mars began transmitting images never seen before. A rippling green core surrounded by a cold, glowing sheath, as if the object were not merely reflecting sunlight but emitting a form of energy of its own. When the first pictures reached Earth, the NASA control room fell into absolute stillness. No one whispered numbers, no one tapped keyboards. They simply stared at the screens, hearts pounding, sensing they were looking at a being rather than a lifeless shard of ice and stone. That awe carried with it a mounting unease. Atlas did not spin chaotically like most comets when nearing the central star. Instead, it maintained an almost perfectly steady axis, as though adjusted by an unseen hand. "This is not the behavior of a natural celestial body," one scientist whispered into the microphone, only to be cut off by the council chair. In official records, every report read, "Phenomenon unexplained." But everyone understood. This was a softer way of naming a truth no one dared to declare. Meanwhile, from the opposite direction, Seraph X was racing toward Earth's orbit. The strange synchronicity unsettled even the most composed. Probability models resurfaced. The chance that two objects of entirely different origins would appear within 45 days of one another was less than 1 in 100 million, and yet the impossible was unfolding before their eyes. That very absence of explanation left many shivering. Could there be a hidden design, a blueprint behind the cosmic curtain, one we had only brushed against? The public, already shaken, now slipped into obsession. They followed every bulletin, every frame from Mars, every signal from orbiting stations. Any detail, however small, was magnified instantly. A faint green glow flickered along Atlas's side. Newspapers dubbed it an energy window. An unusual data ripple? Social media fanned rumors that Atlas is transmitting signals. Fact and fantasy tangled into a chaotic tapestry where no one could tell data from collective hallucination. Behind closed doors, aging scientists debated in trembling voices. Some clung to conservative ground. It is still a comet, merely unusual in chemistry. But others, silent for years, dared at last to voice radical ideas. What if it is some form of device? What if it is not here by accident, but to observe or to respond? Questions once dismissed as absurd now rang out in official conferences, thickening the air with dread. On Earth, ordinary people did not need formulas to feel it. They only had to look up. In rural South America, children screamed as Atlas slashed a green streak across the sky. In Northern Europe, couples clutched each other's hands, trembling as Seraph X's silver glow shimmered upon frozen lakes. The entire planet seemed to beat with a single heart, anxious, quickening, waiting for something nameless. On the night of November 20, a Canadian journalist wrote, "I don't know what 3i divided by Atlas is, but when I gaze at it, I feel as though eyes are gazing back. Not the blind shine of light, but the cold stare from a place we do not belong." The article spread to millions overnight, striking the hidden fear in every soul that we are not the only ones watching. At this moment, humanity stood at a crossroads of emotion. One path was awe, the desire to believe we were witnessing a miracle of science. Another was fear, trembling before the spectre of annihilation. And the last, the most perilous, was extreme curiosity, a hunger so fierce that people were ready to risk everything just to know the truth. By the end of November, as Atlas drifted deeper into the sun's blaze, ground-based telescopes lost sight. Only distant satellites still whispered back faint signals. Silence cloaked the world, as though the universe itself held its breath. And in that vast emptiness, a question echoed across the planet. Is this coincidence or orchestration? The Fender and I embreckling some things, and just in embrecht. November 2025. While humanity was still trembling at the twin appearance of 3i divided by Atlas and Seraph X, another wave of emotion began to spread. Not only fear, not only confusion, but also a kind of overwhelming awe directed at human intelligence itself, and at humanity's long-tested patience. While the public gazed at the sky with trembling eyes, thousands of lifeless machines scattered across the world were quietly collecting, decoding, and whispering into humanity's ears secrets never before heard. In the dry Atacama Desert, the lenses of the Atlas system swept across the night sky, recording each pale green pixel from 3i divided by Atlas with chilling precision. In Hawaii, the Pan-STARRS Observatory carried on the task, pivoting along Earth's orbit to capture every subtle deviation in the interstellar visitor's path. In Europe, the giant mirrors of the Very Large Telescope opened like the eyes of gods, splitting Atlas's light into thousands of spectral lines, the language only science could read. Farther out in orbit, the James Webb Space Telescope stretched its infrared vision through cosmic dust, capturing signals that human eyes would forever be powerless to see. Numbers streamed in like a river of light. Temperatures, velocities, chemical compositions, degrees of luminescence. Each unit of data seemed dry at first glance, yet when combined, they formed a majestic symphony, a moment when humanity, for the first time, felt it was truly hearing the voice of the universe. And in that instant, millions of scientific hearts fell silent together. No one argued. No one thought of national power or personal interest. There was only one emotion left: awe at what human capability had reached. For none of us could face Atlas directly. It was too far, too cold, too alien. To the naked eye, it was no more than a faint blur, easily lost among millions of stars. Yet through patient intellect, through decades of building a global network of observation, humanity had created artificial eyes that could pierce the invisible, artificial ears that could listen to echoes from millions of kilometers away. And when the people in the control rooms saw the first data appear, they knew Atlas was no longer just a shadowy mystery. It was beginning to take shape, beginning to tell its story in a language humans could at last decipher. Humility arose in that moment. We realized that no nation could track Atlas alone. Data from Chile had to be merged with Hawaii's. Signals from New Mexico had to align with Paris. Images from Hubble had to overlay the spectra from Webb. Without each piece, the portrait would remain unfinished. The universe had forced us into cooperation, and that truth brought tears to the eyes of leaders and scientists alike. For the first time in decades, humanity was united in looking toward the same horizon, not for war, not for profit, but for a shared mystery beyond the grasp of any earthly power. From that humility, a fragile yet radiant hope began to sprout. Hope that Atlas, instead of bringing destruction, might become a mirror through which humankind could glimpse its own greatness. The ability to listen, to remember, to ask questions, and search together for answers. Many said that never in modern history had science brought the entire planet to silence in this way. Not silence born of fear, but silence born of reverence, a reverence that flowed backward into our veins, reminding us that in the infinite, we are small, but not meaningless. In rooms filled with screens and control panels, scientists sat still, listening to the universe's whisper. Every flash of data, every curve of orbit traced out, felt like a note in a voiceless symphony. And within that stillness lay something beyond mathematics or physics. A quiet conviction that if Atlas had come, it carried a message not to destroy, but to remind us of the strength of collective intelligence and the boundless patience of humankind. In the weeks that followed, the entire planet seemed to transform into one vast laboratory, where every antenna, every telescope, every satellite contributed its voice to a majestic symphony. Data from 3I divided by Atlas poured in wave after wave, like showers of light. Each packet of signals was a fragment, and when the fragments were layered together, humanity was handed its first map, a guide leading toward the soul of an interstellar visitor. Scientists described the process as a strange kind of dialogue. Atlas made no sound, yet it spoke, by brightening, fading, releasing spectra threaded with mysterious lines. Each line of light was like a character in a language no one had ever read. The most powerful computers in the world, from Switzerland's supercomputers to Japan's quantum processing clusters, joined forces to translate, character by character. And when the first translation appeared, silence spread. Within that green spectrum emerged signs of unusual elements, compounds never before found in comets of the solar system. It was not just data, it was a reminder. The universe is far larger than our imagination dares to stretch. Astronomers in Chile recounted that they wept when the first spectral line appeared on screen, not from fear, but from the moving simplicity of the truth. Human intelligence, after centuries of quiet research, had finally touched that distant language. "We have built tools capable of hearing the breath of stars," one researcher whispered, and the phrase immediately became a slogan, echoing across the globe. At the South Pole, where the night sky was so clear that each constellation cut sharply against the darkness, the observatories joined in. Despite brutal weather, young scientists took shifts through the night, watching every number on their screens. In the negative 60 degrees Celsius winds, wrapped in silver emergency blankets, they huddled together, and when a green signal blinked into view, they laughed aloud like children receiving gifts. That joy spread, needing no language, only eyes filled with reverence and gratitude. The stranger thing was this: the more data humanity gathered, the more humble it became. The proud hypotheses of the beginning that Atlas was just an unusual comet began to dissolve. In their place came the recognition that we had only opened the first door. Every discovery carried a new question. Every answer revealed another void waiting to be filled. And in that endless emptiness, humankind suddenly felt itself strangely small. But this smallness no longer meant shame. It was like a child raising its head to look at its parents for the first time, trembling yet joyful, because it knew there was a vast world waiting to be discovered. From that humility, a faint but shining hope began to flicker. The hope that if we were patient enough, Atlas would reveal not only its own secrets, but also something of our origins. Perhaps in its language of light, there were traces of stellar systems that once gave birth to conditions like Earth's. Perhaps somewhere out there, small beings also looked to their skies and asked the same question: are we alone? And if Atlas carried an answer, then it was not merely a visitor from afar, but a messenger of faith, of hope. Everywhere from laboratories in Berlin to classrooms in Nairobi, from amateur astronomy clubs in Buenos Aires to prayer gatherings in Kathmandu, people turned toward a single center, 3I divided by Atlas. They no longer called it a threat, as they had in previous weeks. Now, many spoke of it with another name, the storyteller from afar. And simply to listen to that story was enough to make humanity feel its heart grow larger, warmer, even as the sky itself remained infinitely cold. In the days that followed, the world seemed to enter an unprecedented state, a rare unity. Instead of arguing or competing, nations began to share data, opening a common vault of information never before seen in modern science. Spectral files were sent directly from NASA to ESA. Images from Chinese observatories were instantly shared with Japanese colleagues. Data from South Africa streamed live into research centers in Canada. Knowledge flowed freely across borders, with no walls to divide it. In this urgency, humanity relearned an old lesson. Before the universe, political boundaries are nothing more than fragile cracks on a paper map. In Geneva, an Atlas data center was established in haste. There, thousands of scientists from more than 80 nations worked side by side, their languages different, but their eyes aligned in rhythm. They no longer introduced themselves by nationality, but by project, by dataset, by the dream of touching truth. Enormous electronic boards covered the walls, glowing with oscillating curves and orbital maps updating by the minute. On every screen, 3I divided by Atlas glowed quietly green, as if watching as humanity pooled its strength to understand it. And in that moment, young scientists whispered to each other, "This isn't just research, this is an encounter between humankind and the cosmos." The sync not to Nate to the snort to the staply. The wonder was no longer found only in the mystery of Atlas, but in humanity's newfound capacity for cooperation. We had once prided ourselves on individual genius, on the lone brilliance of isolated minds. But this time, genius did not belong to a single person, it lived in the collective. Each expert held only a fragment, but when laid side by side, the fragments became a vast mosaic, each detail illuminating the next. The realization left many scientists silent. They saw that Atlas was not only teaching us interstellar secrets, but also the nature of knowledge itself, that knowledge only truly becomes light when shared. Beyond the laboratories, humility spread as well. Millions of people joined public observation gatherings not to scream of doomsday anymore, but to listen as science explained. Children brought small telescopes, and adults read popular science articles. They discussed the strange elements in Atlas's spectra as casually as they might discuss the weather. And in the eyes of children, a new light appeared. The light of dreams, the dream that one day they too could become scientists, listening for other whispers from the universe. Humility before the cosmos turned into hope for the future. When people looked at Atlas, they no longer thought only of danger. They began to imagine possibilities. If there were unusual compounds in Atlas, might there also be planets like Earth out there? If we could decode the language of light, might we find traces of other life? If today humanity could cooperate, might tomorrow we step beyond the solar system together? These questions were no longer mere fantasy. They were like seeds, planted in billions of minds, carrying the belief that even small as we are, we can still go far. A philosopher in Paris wrote in Le Monde, "Atlas may not carry any message at all, but its very presence has compelled us to create a message for ourselves, that humility is not weakness, but the path by which humanity discovers its strength." The words spread everywhere, translated into dozens of languages, and it was true. In the vast silence between stars, humanity bowed for the first time, not out of fear, but from the understanding that to move forward, we must learn to hold one another's hands. On the last night of November, as Atlas dimmed into the sun's glare, millions still gathered before screens, following every update. And in that silence, instead of despair, another feeling took hold: hope. Hope that this encounter, brief as it was, would leave a permanent mark on our collective memory. Hope that someday, when looking back, humanity could say, "That was the moment we learned how to cooperate, how to revere the universe, and how to be humble with ourselves. By the end of November 2025, as 3I divided by Atlas slowly slipped into the sun's blazing glare, Earth-based telescopes began to go blind. The familiar green streak blurred away, swallowed whole by the vast ocean of the solar fire. International observatories were forced to admit, for many weeks ahead, we would lose almost all ability to track it directly. The news stirred a brief shiver among the public, but within the scientific community, another feeling arose: quiet reverence. Before Atlas vanished from sight, humanity had already gathered billions of gigabytes of data, precious journals of light that no force could erase. In data centers, screens still glowed brightly, no longer showing live images of Atlas, but filled with torrents of numbers waiting to be deciphered. Scientists whispered to one another that only now, in this darkness, the true story was beginning. Atlas might have disappeared from human eyes, but its whisper remained hidden in spectral lines, in bands of noise still beyond understanding. And what they admired was not only the mystery Atlas brought, but the patience and persistence of human intelligence, the very thing that had allowed us to hear the invisible. Humility became sharper than ever, for when Atlas vanished into the sun's light, humanity felt keenly that no matter how clever we are, we remain like children standing outside the cosmic door, straining to hear the tales of distant giants. No ornate words could hide that truth. Yet strangely, in that humility, there was no shame, only gratitude. Gratitude for having witnessed, for having remembered, for having learned. Gratitude for the tiny chance to send a question into the sky and wait for an answer from the stars. And at that very moment, hope bloomed stronger than ever. Hope that these streams of data would reveal secrets not only about Atlas, but about the very origins of the universe. Hope that global cooperation, once begun, would not end with Atlas's disappearance, but would grow into humanity's new habit. Hope that the younger generation, the children sitting in classrooms staring at projected images of Atlas, would carry in their hearts the fire of discovery, so that one day they would not only look up, but truly reach outward. All around, people began to call Atlas by new names: Messenger of the Cosmos, the Green Lantern in the Long Night, or simply the Silent Teacher. These names never appeared in scientific reports, yet they reflected a subtle truth. Atlas was no longer just a distant block of ice and rock. It had become a symbol, both spiritual and scientific, a mirror for humanity to gaze into. And in that mirror, we no longer saw a species divided, but a small community learning, together, how to listen. Veteran scientists admitted, never before had they felt so close to their colleagues. Former rivals now sat at the same tables, sharing data, laughing together over an odd bright line in a spectrum. Atlas has achieved what hundreds of peace conferences could not. A professor in Geneva half joked. The remark spread quickly across social media, quoted as proof that even in chaos, the universe could plant seeds of harmony. On the last night before Atlas disappeared completely from view, millions across the world stepped outside, lifting their heads into the darkness. They knew they would see nothing clear, but they looked anyway, for sometimes beauty lies not in seeing, but in knowing something is there. And in that darkness, every heart whispered a silent wish, that when Atlas returned from the far side of the sun, it would bring with it an answer, a sign, a clue for our tireless search. In that moment, humanity stepped together into a new state, waiting in hope. No longer in panic, no longer shouting of doomsday, but resting in a hush of reverence and humility. Atlas had vanished from sight, yet it lived on in the mind. And it was here that a new question formed, ready to open the next chapter. What trace would that green light leave as it passed through the sun's fire? What languages of metals, of atoms never seen, would appear in the coming spectra? And if we were patient enough, might Atlas already be whispering to us the deeper secret, hidden in the language of the stars? By late November 2025, as 3I divided by Atlas slipped deeper into the sun's dazzling halo, the atmosphere inside laboratories seemed as if it would finally settle. Observers braced for a lull, a waiting period where patience was their only instrument until the next stream of data arrived. But then, from the very spectra already recorded, an earthquake erupted not from the sky this time, but from the heart of science itself. In virtual meetings linking Geneva, Hawaii, Berlin, Tokyo, and Cape Town, hundreds of scientists stared at the same screen. The spectral lines glowed sharp and clear, slender yet blade-like, as if Atlas had left its personal signature in space. A Swiss research team broke the silence first, We confirm the presence of nickel. But there is absolutely no trace of iron. The words cracked like lightning in the room. Scientists glanced at one another, for a moment, too stunned to speak. With centuries of accumulated knowledge, such a result was deemed impossible. Nickel and iron were an inseparable pair. In planetary cores, in meteorites, in comets they always appeared together. Iron was the dominant element, nickel only the companion. But in Atlas, the picture was reversed. Nickel, present in strength, iron, wholly absent. Confusion spread everywhere. A scientist in Tokyo muttered, "Maybe the instrument failed." A Berlin specialist hurried to recalibrate the spectrograph, re-entering parameters again and again. Yet no matter how many times, the outcome remained the same. In Chile, an independent system confirmed the result, and in South Africa, the final wave of data erased any hope of blaming error. Atlas truly contained nickel, but no iron. The news surged outward like a tidal wave. Headlines screamed, "Atlas breaks the law." Social media ignited with arguments, some skeptics scoffing. Science fabricates stories to grab attention, while conspiracy theorists insisted, Atlas isn't natural, it's manufactured. Yet within the scientific community itself, emotions tangled into something far more volatile. They were seized by both suffocating doubt and breathless exhilaration. A young researcher in Hawaii recalled, "When I first saw the spectrum missing iron, my heart sank. But then, almost instantly, I felt a strange joy. Because if the universe can shatter even the most basic rules we believe in, then there must be so much more waiting for us to discover." That line spread like fire, repeated across emergency conferences worldwide. Veteran experts, usually so guarded, could not conceal their shock. A professor in Geneva exclaimed, "If Atlas is right, then our entire curriculum in astrochemistry must be rewritten. And that is not failure, it is the greatest opportunity of our lives." Applause broke out, not in celebration, but in recognition of truth. Science had been thrust into a colossal trial, and they were the lucky ones to witness it. Amid the confusion, another feeling crept in, awe laced with fear. Humanity had grown accustomed to believing it understood much of the cosmos, that bedrock laws like iron and nickel were unshakable truths. Yet Atlas, with its cold green silence, revealed we had touched only the surface of the iceberg. The universe still held secrets capable of breaking every definition, and that reality left people both stunned and entranced. Bewilderment, doubt, exhilaration. The three emotions spun together in humanity's mind like a furious storm. And within that storm, one question echoed ceaselessly. What is Atlas trying to show us? And do we have the courage to look directly at that truth? As soon as the finding that nickel existed without iron was confirmed by multiple observatories, a cascade of emergency conferences erupted. In Geneva, the hall of the International Astronomical Union blazed with light for 3 consecutive nights. Experts from across the world flew in, crowding into a chamber filled with spectral charts, each faint green line as thin as a strand of hair, yet carrying the weight of a theoretical bomb. "This is an instrument error." A German scientist slammed the table, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. "It's impossible to have nickel without iron. If we release this result, the entire community will laugh in our faces." "But the data from 5 independent systems all say the same thing," a Japanese colleague replied, his hands shaking as he held the printout. "We've checked, recalibrated, cross-compared. A simultaneous error across all systems is impossible." The atmosphere in the hall was taut as a drawn string. On one side, skeptics feared science would lose credibility if it embraced a phenomenon defying every rule. On the other side stood those eager to break away from convention, ready to claim this as the first evidence of a new chapter. Between them, whispers swelled louder, turning the meeting into a courtroom without a judge. In the US, NASA held a press briefing. A reporter asked bluntly, "Is there a possibility that 3I divided by Atlas is not a natural object?" The question froze the room. The spokesperson faltered, evasive, "We don't yet have sufficient evidence to conclude." But that single ambiguous remark detonated online. Within an hour, the hashtag number #AtlasArtificial climbed to the top, accompanied by millions of posts declaring Atlas to be a probe from a distant civilization. Doubt was no longer confined to scientists, it rippled through the public. Some believed the data had been manipulated to hide a terrifying truth. Others claimed governments had staged Atlas as a hoax to control the masses. Yet interwoven with those extreme theories were sparks of pure scientific exhilaration. In Berlin, a group of young researchers eagerly sketched out hypotheses. What if, in some supernova explosion, nickel particles escaped before iron could form? The question lit the lab like a flame dropped in oil. Another student jumped in. Or what if this isn't pure nickel at all, but an entirely new compound, something that mimics nickel's spectrum but is fundamentally different? Each fragile idea made hearts beat faster. For every one of them opened doors no one had ever knocked on before. In that atmosphere, confusion was no longer paralysis, it became a catalyst. Doubt and excitement braided together, sparking fiery debates that stretched for hours. Some pounded tables shouting, "You're destroying your careers." Others leapt to their feet, eyes blazing. This is the very moment science exists for. At last, an elderly professor in Tokyo spoke, his voice slow but steady. "We once believed Earth was the center of the universe, and we trembled when the truth proved otherwise. We once believed Newton could explain everything, until Einstein appeared. And now perhaps it is nickel and iron's turn. Do not fear, let confusion lead the way." The hall fell silent, not because everyone agreed, but because they sensed something deeper. They were standing on the threshold of a turning point, and whether in doubt or in awe, no one could turn away from the cold green truth Atlas was whispering. After the first days of drowning in argument, a new wave swept through the scientific world, the Atlas experiment fever. Confusion no longer held anyone back. It became the spark that set laboratories ablaze. People understood that either they would prove the data wrong, or they would rewrite part of the history of science, both paths far too enticing to resist. In Geneva, the theoretical astronomy team reconstructed the scenario of an ancient supernova. They simulated thousands of variations until a faint possibility emerged. If, in the very first moments, layers of matter were separated, nickel might escape before iron had the chance to form. The model was far from perfect, but it opened a slit of light in the wall of deadlock. After countless sleepless nights, researchers burst into applause when the graph appeared. "Not impossible. Atlas has shown us a narrow way forward," they wrote in their report. Across the ocean in California, supercomputers roared day and night. Millions of celestial collision models were run simultaneously. Amid the countless simulations, a handful of bizarre results matched Atlas's data. A mass of nickel, existing alone, iron, completely absent. "Perhaps this is the product of an extremely rare collision hundreds of millions of years ago," the team leader announced, his voice trembling with shock and exhilaration. In the lab, students hugged each other and laughed, as if they had just touched a hidden treasure of the cosmos. In Tokyo, a quantum research group followed a different path. The hypothesis of an unknown isotope. What if this isn't ordinary nickel but a strange twin form? They built a model and, unexpectedly, the spectrum produced nearly matched Atlas's data. The room erupted. A student burst into tears in the middle of the meeting. "We are rewriting the periodic table." The statement was recorded, shared, and soon became a symbol of the rising tide of excitement. Preliminary papers poured forth. Journals large and small received submissions at 10 times the usual rate. Bold headlines filled the lists. "Nickel without iron, challenging the old laws," "Atlas, and the rebirth of cosmic matter," "the phantom isotope." Some papers were thin, even poorly verified, yet no one mocked them. Everyone understood. This was a historic moment, where science was not only seeking answers, but also relearning how to ask questions. The thrill spread beyond laboratories. At Harvard, thousands of students crammed into a special lecture on Atlas, bursting into applause when the professor closed with the words, "If you want to know what Newton felt when the apple fell, look at Atlas's data." In Kenya, an amateur astronomy club built a 3D model of the nickel-iron spectrum and projected it on the village wall. The entire community sat under the night sky, gazing in silence, as though attending a sacred ritual. And yet, skepticism never left. Many scientists warned, "We may be chasing an illusion." Some skeptical newspapers asked, "What if all this is simply an analytical error? What then?" But strangely, those very warnings only pushed others to work harder. For if it truly were an illusion, proving it false would still be a triumph. And if it were true, then it would be the greatest discovery in decades. Either way, Atlas had transformed confusion into momentum, doubt into fuel for imagination. An elderly professor in Berlin summed it up, Atlas not only changes knowledge, it changes our attitude toward knowledge itself. Confusion is no longer failure, it is the beginning. And indeed, in the storm of science Atlas had unleashed, humanity realized confusion was not a stop, it was the opening drumbeat of a new chapter. When the first reports were released to the public, the scientific community was swept into a whirlwind. Hypotheses sprang up one after another, but the more explanations appeared, the denser the confusion grew. Each idea, however dazzling in the moment, soon revealed its cracks. The supernova model from Geneva looked promising, but when applied to realistic conditions, its probability was virtually zero. Critics sneered, "If the odds are that low, you might as well call Atlas a miracle." The collision hypothesis from California stirred excitement, but ran into a dead end. No observational evidence suggested such an event had happened in recent times. Tokyo's proposal of a new isotope was compelling, but countered by a lack of experimental proof. The fierce debates turned every conference into a battlefield, where pens and words became weapons. And yet, amid the fire of doubt, the light of scientific exhilaration still flared. Research teams, even in failure, pressed on like addicts, entranced by a riddle with no solution. "Every hypothesis is flawed, but it is the flaws that matter," said a young scientist in Cape Town. If Atlas was simple to explain, it would be just another rock passing by. But because it defies explanation, it becomes a mirror for the very essence of science. That confusion was not just a feeling, but a collective experience. In student cafes, people argued about nickel and iron the way they argued about soccer. On social media, millions proudly shared spectral graphs. Children drew pictures of Atlas, imagining it as a green star that talks. Somehow, a phenomenon that defied understanding had become a bridge between science and the public, between doubt and faith. Still, the deeper the scientists went, the more they felt a gnawing frustration. Every answer remained incomplete. Atlas was like a silent teacher, tossing out a single puzzle piece before retreating, forcing its students to struggle through the maze. No matter how many simulations, experiments, or equations they tried, something was missing, and without that missing piece, every picture collapsed. A professor in Geneva sighed during a closed meeting. "We are rewriting the book, but we don't yet have the page to write on." The bitter remark echoed in everyone's mind, and strangely, it did not bring despair. Instead, it made them want to pick up the pen even more, to hunger for the true page Atlas was hiding. In that chaos, one truth grew clearer. Confusion was not the end, but the opening beat of the drum. Doubt was not darkness, but the flashlight shining into the blur. And scientific exhilaration came not only from answers, but from daring to step into places no one had gone before. By late December 2025, as headlines about Atlas filled the world, a new question seized humanity's imagination. If its very chemistry defied reason, could its orbit truly be natural? While scientists wrestled with nickel and iron, Atlas and Seraph continued to close in on the sun, their paths more and more synchronized, like two dancers in a mysterious cosmic play. And so, from chemical mystery, humanity lifted its gaze once more to face another enigma. Two orbits, one dance. Late December 2025. While laboratories were still awash in the storm of nickel and iron data, a new bulletin swept across the world, leaving millions breathless. The International Space Observation Center released an updated orbital map of 3I divided by Atlas, and what appeared on the screen stunned the planet to the point of shivers. Atlas was not traveling along a simple hyperbolic path like previous interstellar visitors. It bent itself into a graceful curve, twisting gently at several points, and then suddenly aligned with the trajectory of another object. Comet Aegis 9, just discovered in South America. One green and cold, the other bright and silver, yet both headed toward the same destination, the Sun's radiant corona. The twin orbits were projected onto a giant screen in Geneva. The green line of Atlas, the silver line of Aegis 9. At first, they seemed like two foreign rivers flowing in opposite directions, but the farther the view extended, the more they converged, until they overlapped almost perfectly. The entire hall held its breath. Many unconsciously placed their hands over their hearts, as if to keep their pulse from breaking. For the first time, it was not chemical data or cold numbers, but the sheer geometry of the cosmos that left humanity spellbound. A scientist in Paris blurted out, "This is a galactic choreography." A reporter in New York typed instantly on Twitter, This isn't astronomy anymore. This is art. A ballet of colossal ice and stone. Those words were shared millions of times within hours. The public, long accustomed to fear, now fell into a different state, overwhelmed by the scale and impossible beauty of such synchrony. On social media, the orbital chart spread at the speed of light. People added music, giving it a title, the Cosmic Waltz. Some clips even overlaid images of dancers, merging them with the arcs of Atlas and Aegis. Many admitted they wept just from seeing those two simple curves. "I've never seen the universe look so beautiful," one comment read. "It's as if someone is painting a picture for us to watch." The press joined in. Le Monde called it the most beautiful coincidence in history. The Guardian headlined, "If this is chance, it is a divine chance." In Japan, a sculptor built a stainless steel model of the two orbits and displayed it in a Tokyo square. Thousands gathered to stand in silence, as if attending a memorial. Yet after the awe came the unease. Questions rose in waves. Why? If this were a coincidence, why so perfect a coincidence? And if not coincidence, what then? Who or what had written this play? At the international conference, when the screen displayed the cold line, Atlas and Aegis 9 orbits, synchronized 98.7%, the entire room fell silent. No one laughed. No one clapped. Because that number was no longer just a statistic. It was a direct challenge to human intelligence. It carried the eerie suggestion that some invisible hand was arranging the paths of stars. An elderly professor in London whispered, "If this is a chance, it is the most beautiful chance I have ever seen. But if not, then we are standing inside a script written since the dawn of time." The remark immediately became a headline on dozens of papers, spreading across the internet at astonishing speed. On the last nights of the year, as fireworks prepared to burst, millions around the world tilted their heads to the sky. They knew their eyes could not trace the orbits, yet they still looked as if, by looking long enough, they might feel the rhythm hidden there. And in those eyes there was awe and fear, and a question no one had yet answered. Is this coincidence, or is it a message? Right after the figure 98.7% synchronization was announced, the world plunged into a storm of fierce debate. Articles, opinion pieces, and live videos poured in endlessly. The entire planet seemed to have turned into one enormous conference hall, where every voice wanted to be heard. This is a statistical coincidence. No, this is an invisible hand. Inside scientific auditoriums, the tension was taut as a string. In Washington, NASA experts split clearly into two camps. One side insisted that, however rare, this could still be a chance. "The universe is vast enough to allow for the impossible," said one scientist, struggling to keep his tone steady. The younger camp shouted back, "Chance? Then why do the orbits match to the last percent? Why now, in the very moment when nickel-iron already challenges every theory?" In Paris, ESA convened an open forum. The hall overflowed. A renowned mathematician presented the odds. The probability of two objects from opposite directions converging simultaneously at the solar corona is 1 part in a trillion. In theory, it practically does not exist. The words rippled through the crowd. Some people broke down in tears on the spot, not out of fear, but as if they had been pulled away from the solid ground of reason itself. Meanwhile, religions seized the moment. In Rome, the Pope declared, "These two orbits are no game. They are a reminder that we are witnessing the design of a higher order." In Mecca, clerics preached that this was a sign of Judgment Day. In India, tens of thousands gathered along the Ganges, releasing lamps into the current, believing the dance of Atlas and Aegis to be a prophecy opening the door of rebirth. Confusion stretched far beyond religion. The public splintered into different emotional camps. Some were so overwhelmed they saw it as a message of love from the cosmos. Others trembled, convinced it was a warning of apocalypse. And then came the hard skeptics, who claimed the entire phenomenon was fabricated. The governments built it up. Some voices accused. They manipulate satellites, forge the data, all to control us. Conspiracy theories erupted, racing across the internet like wildfire. Amid all that noise, another sensation rose, vague yet powerful, relentless questioning. Everywhere, on every forum, people asked, if this is a coincidence, why is it so beautiful? If this is an arrangement, who arranged it? If this is a message, what is it saying? No one had an answer, and the absence itself carved deeper into the imagination of billions. In classrooms, teachers unwillingly became debate moderators. Children raised their hands to ask, "Teacher, is someone out there steering Atlas?" In coffee shops, students argued passionately, pointing at phone screens showing the orbital paths. At press briefings, journalists pressed so hard that spokespeople faltered mid-sentence. The world felt like it was living inside a colossal trial, with the universe as the silent witness, and humanity both defendant and judge, accusing, pleading, demanding answers. The first awe had now transformed into a tangled blend of emotions: confusion due to the lack of resolution, doubt about the refusal to accept the chance, and wonder for the hunger to find meaning. A philosopher in Berlin wrote, "Atlas and Aegis are not merely challenging physics, they are challenging philosophy itself. They force us to ask, is cosmic order random or scripted?" He was not they so need you at Rafted 5. On the night of December 31, as the world stepped into a new year, fireworks exploded across the skies. Yet many admitted they no longer cared for the spectacle. They lifted their gaze instead to where two unseen paths still arc toward the Sunday. Beneath the noise of festivals, beneath the intoxication of midnight wine, there remained a deeper silence. The silence of unanswered questions, the silence of fear hidden inside wonder, the silence of a question the universe had yet to answer. After the surge of emotion in the public and among religious leaders, the scientific community entered the most intense phase of its debate. Hypotheses were launched, only to be discarded without mercy. Atlas and Aegis 9 had become a mirror. Whoever gazed into it saw their own belief and their own fear reflected. In Geneva, a 7-hour international conference ended under a taut electric atmosphere. One group of experts insisted, "This is a statistical coincidence. A tiny probability is not the same as impossibility." They projected random simulations showing that, while rare, a few scenarios did exist where two orbits nearly overlapped. But immediately the opposing camp struck back. "If you call this coincidence, then it is a coincidence suspiciously exact. A 98.7% synchronization is no joke. It's as if someone held a pen and drew it." Those arguments spilled across the globe. In the U.S., a team of scholars published an article, "Atlas and Aegis, First Evidence of Natural Navigation." They suggested there might be an unknown force, a kind of gravitational current steering celestial bodies like boats on a tide. But only days later, other physicists dismantled the claim, proving the data was insufficient for such a conclusion. Disappointment mixed with confusion left many in heavy silence. Meanwhile, bolder ideas emerged. Some younger scientists proposed, what if Atlas isn't just a comet but a constructed structure? They displayed comparison charts, pointing out that its orbit was too tidy, too stable, unlike the inherent chaos of natural bodies. The notion was attacked instantly. This is science, not science fiction. Yet even as it was dismissed, the question had been planted in millions of minds. If not natural, then who? In the laboratories, awe had turned into obsession. Research teams locked themselves in through the night, combing over every detail of the orbit, searching for flaws in the measurements. But each time the results came back, the 98.7% synchronization stood unmoving, as if mocking human intellect. A scientist in Berlin sighed, "Atlas feels like it's taunting us. The more we try to prove it random, the more perfect it appears." The public followed every beat like a gripping match. Television channels broadcast the scientific conferences live. Viewers sat before their screens, gasping when a hypothesis was overturned, clapping when a new idea flickered into life. In Mexico City, a cafe hung a giant screen, turning international panels into a primetime show for hundreds who gathered to watch. One student commented, "I've never seen science so dramatic. It's like a movie, but we're living in the film." Skepticism spread wider. Some believed the data had been doctored. Others suspected scientists were hiding something. Yet paradoxically, that very skepticism only fed the Atlas fever. Every rebuttal, every announcement became breaking news, discussed everywhere from government boardrooms to family dinner tables. And inside this whirlpool, questioning had become a collective obsession. Why were two alien objects waltzing before the sun? Why now, at the very moment humanity had uncovered the nickel-iron anomaly? Why was the synchronization so beautiful that it defied belief? These questions hung suspended, unanswered, yet no one dared to ignore them. A philosopher at Oxford concluded in a lecture, "Perhaps this is a coincidence, perhaps it is a message. But more importantly, the awe and bewilderment themselves have taught us something. The universe is not only to be observed, but to be questioned." As night fell under the winter sky, millions around the world tilted their heads upward. They could no longer see Atlas or Aegis with the naked eye, yet they imagined two invisible arcs still drawing closer, as though the cosmos were writing a poem in orbits. And in that silence, humanity, as one asked itself, if this is not chance, then what are we standing before? Early January 2026. Atlas and Aegis 9 entered the final stage of their orbital dance. Orbital telescopes streamed back images of two luminous trails curving ever closer to the sun's corona. Millions watched online, their hearts pounding as if they were witnessing a cosmic ritual. The sky was no longer just an indifferent darkness. It had become a stage where two colossal celestial bodies wove together a fated choreography. Awe spread from laboratories to city streets. In New York, the giant screens of Times Square displayed live orbital graphics. The crowd stood silent, no cheers, no laughter, only eyes tense with wonder. In Tokyo, people gathered along the Sumida River, releasing paper lanterns onto the water, as if to sync their rhythm with the dance above. In Cairo, thousands knelt in the square, chanting prayers beneath screens glowing with Atlas's image. The world had fallen into a kind of silent festival, where everyone knew they were witnessing something beyond imagination. But awe carried with it a gnawing unease. Each step of the converging orbits sparked fresh questions. If this is chance, why is it so perfect? If it is a design, who wrote the script? If this is a message, are we misreading it? Hypotheses multiplied, but all lacked the missing piece. No one dared to state anything certain, and that very ambiguity, instead of cooling minds, only fanned the flames of imagination. In closed-door meetings, many experts admitted they had never seen a phenomenon that provoked such total bewilderment. Some leaned toward an improbable chance. Others did not hesitate to suggest, perhaps this is a form of cosmic message. Once, such words would have been mocked, but now, in the suffocating atmosphere, no one dared laugh. For all knew that Atlas had already forced humanity more than once to erase what it thought was certain. Skepticism also bloomed. Some conservative scholars warned, "Do not let beauty deceive you. We need evidence, not poetry." But out there, the public no longer wanted the cold voice of reason. They had seen those two curves move in harmony, and for them, that was proof enough that the universe was whispering a secret. During those days, art and religion fused with science, creating a tapestry both chaotic and magnificent. Composers wrote symphonies titled Dance of the Suns. Painters rendered oil canvases of Atlas and Aegis as colossal dancers spinning amid a sea of fire. Poets etched haunting lines, "If this is the final dance, will we dare to step in?" And millions of people, young and old alike, kept repeating the same question. Why now? Why us? In the descent for many refer. The crescendo of awe came on January 12, when measurements showed Atlas and Aegis at their closest convergence, their orbits differing by less than 0.3%. Scientists stared silently at the figure glowing on their screens, no one daring to speak. Not because they had found an answer, but because the perfection was beyond words. One researcher whispered, "If this is a coincidence, then coincidence has become divine." And yet, despite the wonder, the conclusion of this chapter remained unresolved. As Atlas and Aegis were slowly swallowed by the sun's blinding glare, the world once again fell into the shadow of waiting. People knew it would take weeks, perhaps months, before new data could emerge. And in that pause, humanity was left only with the lingering question, what does this dance mean? A flawless accident or a scripted message? This bewilderment, rather than fading, opened a door to what would come next. For when reason falters, imagination rises. And it was there, in that fertile silence, that a flood of hypotheses ranging from rigorous science to reckless speculation began to take shape, preparing to lead humanity into the next chapter, the scientific and the fantastical theories. January 2026. As Atlas and Aegis 9 were swallowed by the sun's blinding glare, ground-based telescopes grew helpless. Only a few distant orbital stations sent back scattered fragments of data, incomplete and fractured. The world fell into a hush, like the sky after thunder has passed. And within that silence, humanity's imagination erupted. When evidence is uncertain, people do what they have always done best: weave hypotheses beyond the reach of reason. A research team at Oxford released an idea that shook the world. Atlas is the scout, and Aegis 9, the fortress. According to them, the two objects could not possibly be a coincidence. Atlas had been sent ahead as reconnaissance, while Aegis 9 followed as overseer or as a weapon poised to strike. Fear spread instantly. Headlines screamed, "Are we being watched?" On social media, Atlas was depicted as a massive eye staring down at Earth, while Aegis 9 appeared as a spearhead aimed at humanity. Sleepless nights followed, as many imagined the corona's light could turn at any moment into the signal for an attack. Yet alongside fear, another hypothesis ignited, this one glowing with optimism. A group of European philosophers argued that Atlas was not a mere celestial body, but a form of cosmic memory, a message cast adrift by a long-vanished civilization, like a glass bottle tossed into the sea of stars. Inside the bottle was no threat, but a fragment of remembrance, whispering, "You are not alone. Before you, others pass through. After you, others will come." The theory sparked hope. If Atlas carried a message, then it meant we had siblings out there, perhaps no longer alive, but still leaving behind traces. Two hypotheses, one dark, one radiant, clashed against each other, leaving the public trembling and enthralled all at once. In New York, a group of street artists staged a light performance, projecting Atlas as a colossal eye across building walls. Beneath, they danced in shadows to illustrate the idea of scout and fortress. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, Buddhist monks held all-night chants, believing Atlas to be a silent scripture sent by the universe to teach humanity humility. Art, religion, and science fused within this tide of imagination. In Mexico, a young filmmaker announced a pseudo-documentary project titled Silent Memory, portraying Atlas as a library containing the memories of thousands of vanished civilizations. In Berlin, a band released a song called Message in the Stars, its melody somber yet triumphant, drawing millions of listens within a week. Paintings, symphonies, and poems were produced in torrents, as if humanity no longer distinguished science from art. All became a single language to express the obsession named Atlas. During this period, international television turned speculative debates into primetime events. Panels included not only scientists but also novelists, philosophers, and science fiction directors. Each added a fragment, one fearing apocalypse, another believing in a message of love, another dreaming of technology that transcends time. Some commentators derided it as a collective delirium, yet for billions it was the first time they felt themselves living inside a story larger than Earth, a story that might decide the fate of humankind. Amid the storm of conjectures, a question echoed everywhere. Did Atlas come to observe, to destroy, or to remind? No one had an answer. Yet the very absence made imagination burn brighter than ever, and at the heart of the whirlwind, humanity found itself, for the first time, speaking a single shared language. The language of imagination, radiant, terrifying, and filled with hope. If the earlier weeks had sown hope and ignited imagination, the weeks that followed grew darker in tone. As signals from Atlas and Aegis 9 remained uncertain, grim hypotheses burst forth like fire in dry straw. They did not merely spread fear, they pushed human imagination to the edge of the abyss. A military strategy group in Washington released a classified report that was soon leaked. Atlas and Aegis 9 may be cosmic weapons. The report claimed that their near-perfect orbital synchronization, combined with the anomalous nickel composition without iron, suggested the possibility of engineered technology rather than natural objects. They described Atlas as a giant warhead and Aegis 9 as its trigger. Once this information reached the press, it fanned global anxiety. Whispers spread. If it's a weapon, could it blow apart the entire planet? Mainstream scientists scrambled to refute. There is no evidence Atlas is a weapon. Yet such denials, thin and fragile, could not extinguish the wildfire of fear. On social media, illustrations turned Atlas into a colossal missile aimed directly at Earth. A simulated video went viral, depicting the moment Atlas entered the atmosphere and exploded like a second sun, incinerating all life. It was pure fabrication, but within days it had been watched by hundreds of millions of times. Religious voices poured fuel on the flames. In the Middle East, Some clerics declared Atlas the fire star mentioned in ancient scripture, a herald of Judgment Day. Across Latin America, thousands marched in the streets with banners, "Prepare for the end." Churches overflowed, standing room gone. Prayers blended with sobs, turning entire cities into silent farewell rituals for humanity itself. Meanwhile, science fractured under the weight of doubt. Some astronomers admitted that if Atlas were truly artificial, it might contain technology far beyond human imagination. A professor in Berlin whispered during a closed session, "If it is a weapon, perhaps we never truly held mastery over our own fate." The remark leaked, and panic deepened. Fear spread like contagion. In Tokyo, hundreds of families rushed to hoard food supplies. In California, communities built makeshift bunkers. In Moscow, tens of thousands crowded into subway stations, believing them safe havens if disaster struck. The global atmosphere swayed like the air before a great storm, yet no one knew where the storm might break. Governments tried to reassure their citizens, but they too were shaken. The UN Security Council convened emergency sessions, fiercely debating whether to prepare for a space defense scenario. Some nations proposed launching missiles to test Atlas's response, but others pushed back immediately. If it really is a weapon, would provocation trigger it? Suspicion and fear tightened like a noose around the human mind. And yet, within this climate of dread, imagination refused to rest. Writers, painters, filmmakers rushed to create grim visions. Films portraying Earth swallowed by Atlas, paintings of a crimson sky as Aegis 9 unleashed a chain of annihilation. Children invented a game called Atlas is Coming, hiding under tables to escape the invisible giant. Fear had seeped into every breath of daily life, and then one question rang again and again, echoing like a bell in humanity's memory. If Atlas is not a message, not a scout, but a weapon, who sent it? And for what ultimate purpose? No one had an answer. Yet in the shadows of dread, imagination still raced, painting ever more terrifying scenarios. Atlas was no longer a distant celestial body. It had become a collective obsession, a global nightmare hovering above, silent, motionless, yet immense in power. After days steeped in fear and visions of apocalypse, a new wave of hypotheses began to rise, hopeful ones, like the first light of dawn tearing through a night sky heavy with dread. Humanity, unable to live forever in panic, started to imagine Atlas not as a weapon, but as a gift, a message, a key, a door opening onto the future. In Geneva, a circle of philosophers and interdisciplinary scientists convened a forum titled Atlas, the Cosmic Lighthouse. They argued that if the orbits of Atlas and Aegis 9 were too perfect to be random, then perhaps they were intentional, deliberately arranged with a positive purpose. Much like a landmark planted to guide travelers along a road, Atlas might be a cosmic signpost for a young civilization like ours. An elderly philosophy professor stood and said, "Perhaps we have been invited into a great dialogue. Only this dialogue takes place through the language of orbits and light." In California, a team of cosmic energy researchers released a hypothesis that sent shockwaves around the world. Atlas may contain a source of energy never before known. The fact that nickel existed without iron, they suggested, might not be an anomaly at all, but rather a signature of an extraordinary material structure, capable of releasing energy on a scale beyond even nuclear power. If humanity could learn how to harness it, Atlas might hold the key to an age of infinite clean energy. The idea lit up the eyes of millions. People stopped seeing Atlas as a threat, and instead as a possible beacon of salvation in an era of climate crisis and dwindling resources. Across online forums, these positive visions spread like wildfire. Some speculated that Atlas was a library ship, carrying memories and knowledge of a long-lost civilization, left behind so future beings would not repeat the same mistakes. Others dreamed that Atlas was a seed of life, carrying cosmic DNA ready to germinate on planets that met the right conditions. Still others described it as a love letter from the universe, a reminder that even in its loneliness, humanity was cradled within a greater order. This optimism was not confined to academia, it poured into daily life. In Kenya, children drew pictures of Atlas as a giant friend smiling in the sky. In Brazil, a Protestant church held a special service, proclaiming Atlas, the sign of new faith. In Seoul, a young pop band released a song titled Hello, Atlas, its cheerful melody hailing the comet as a long-awaited visitor coming to Earth to tell a secret story. Yet such optimism did not erase skepticism entirely. Some scientists cautioned that humanity might be idealizing too much. If Atlas is nothing more than a natural object, then we've woven too many illusions around it, one physicist remarked. But even he admitted, the power of hopeful imagination is real. It can drive us forward, even when truth remains out of reach. And indeed, something strange began to happen within the charged atmosphere of debate. This very optimism started pulling humanity closer together. Nations once divided over whether Atlas was a weapon or a message now opened discussions of cooperation. If Atlas truly contains an energy secret, can we not decode it together rather than compete for it? Suddenly, Atlas was no longer merely a cosmic object. It had become a test of humanity's capacity for unity. On a bright January night beneath a full moon, millions lifted their eyes skyward, not in fear but in hope. They whispered, sang, prayed, painted, composed, everything orbiting the same thought. Perhaps Atlas has not come to destroy, but to open a door. And in that moment, humanity, still uncertain, still bewildered, found a reason to believe in tomorrow. By late January 2026, while Atlas and Aegis 9 remained hidden behind the sun's blinding glare, humanity entered the most intense phase of its storm of imagination. Hypotheses were no longer mere intellectual games. They had become emotional front lines, splitting the world into two poles. Those who believed Atlas was a ghost of destruction, and those who saw it as a torch of hope. In major cities, opposing banners lined the streets. In New York, thousands gathered outside the United Nations headquarters, raising placards that read, "Atlas equals weapon." Just a few blocks away, another crowd assembled, chanting, "Atlas equals message of love." The two groups stared at one another across police barricades, their eyes filled with a volatile mix of fear, anger, and longing. Both looked up at the same sky, yet each side saw a different reality. Online, the divide grew sharper still. One viral video depicted Atlas as a massive warhead poised to crash into Earth, edited with ominous music, and racking up hundreds of millions of views. At the same time, a hashtag campaign called Number Atlas Hope swept through timelines, spreading artwork of Atlas as a radiant heart suspended in the cosmos, glowing with tenderness. People were no longer merely talking about a celestial object, they were talking about their own beliefs. In universities, professors and students debated until they were exhausted. One side argued that the orbit data was too precise to be random evidence of intervention and potential weaponization. The other side countered that this very perfection was an invitation. If the universe wanted to destroy, it wouldn't need to be beautiful. Beauty is the language of creation, not of annihilation. The line was quoted endlessly, becoming a slogan for the optimistic camp. Governments, too, could no longer remain passive. Some nations prepared emergency defense strategies, even considering the testing of space weapons. Others, smaller countries without such arsenals, called instead for global cooperation. If Atlas carries knowledge, we cannot afford to miss this chance. The United Nations became a stage where the tug-of-war between the fear of war and the dream of human unity played out in full view. This divide seeped into families as well. In Rome, a father whispered to his son, "Don't believe the hopeful stories. Atlas is a warning. You must prepare for the worst." But in the same home, the mother gently replied, "No, my child. Atlas is like a miracle. It comes to remind us that we are not alone." The boy sat silently, his eyes clouded with confusion. For his generation, Atlas was no longer just a celestial body. It had become a symbol of fractured faith. In that charged atmosphere, imagination reached its peak. Writers rushed to publish books with provocative titles like The Day Atlas Lands or Atlas Message from the Future. Hollywood directors raced to secure rights to these concepts for films. Churches, temples, and shrines wove Atlas into their rituals. No corner of Earth remained untouched by the spiraling storm of imagination. And yet, amid all the noise, a sobering realization slowly took shape. None of the hypotheses could truly convince. They were all mirrors of human minds, reflecting fear and hope in equal measure. Atlas itself remained silent, coldly tracing its orbit in the cosmic dance, revealing not a single clue of its true intent. A scientist in Geneva ended his speech with these words, "Atlas is not the answer. It is the mirror. We look into it and see only ourselves, our fear, our hope, our divisions, and our longing to understand." The statement spread swiftly. resonating like a collective admission that humanity was wandering a labyrinth built not by the stars, but by its own imagination. And at that very moment, when imagination had reached its breaking point, science was forced to return to the forefront. Only science could test what was true and what was a dream. The world began to wait once more, eyes fixed on the heavens, ready to enter the next chapter, where verified scientific hypotheses would rise, and the fragile myths of imagination would be put to the test. February 2026. After weeks hidden in the sun's blinding halo, 3I divided by Atlas suddenly emerged from the corona, moving slowly, like an actor stepping out from backstage after the climax of a tense play. The first image sent back by space telescopes made the entire world hold its breath. A slender streak of light, brighter than ever, curling like a silver thread across the black velvet of the cosmos. In that instant, all the dark hypotheses, all the fiery debates, all the apocalyptic fears dissolved. Only one sensation flooded the minds of billions: wonder. Atlas was no longer just a cold object. It became living proof that the universe, vast and silent, still had moments when it knew how to sing its own melody. At Times Square, thousands gathered before a giant screen, erupting into cheers as the streak appeared. In Paris, church bells rang out, not as alarms of danger, but as if to welcome back a mysterious guest who had stepped out from behind a curtain of light. In Nairobi, children danced around bonfires, shouting Atlas's name as though they were calling to a friend. For one rare moment, the world moved in unison, breathing the same rhythm. Even scientists, those usually hardened by data, could not contain their emotions. A European Space Agency expert, tears in his eyes, admitted, "I have looked at thousands of celestial objects, but never one that made me feel I was witnessing a miracle." A colleague in Tokyo whispered, "Atlas has passed through the sun and returned. It feels like a symbol of rebirth." Not only scientists, but ordinary people, too, felt as though they had been given a sacred gift. In conversations and across social media, one phrase repeated endlessly: "We are so lucky to live in this age, to witness Atlas with our own eyes." That sentiment spread across millions of tongues, becoming a global refrain. Atlas's reappearance was not just an astronomical event, but a kind of sacred ceremony. It reminded humanity that amid the violent current of time, the universe still grants us rare chances to be terrified by beauty. And within that awe lay a quiet gratitude. Gratitude for eyes to see, hearts to tremble, and imaginations to understand that we were witnessing something larger than ourselves. That night, under clear skies, millions tilted their heads upward. No more urgent questions, no more clashing theories. Only the light of Atlas, silent yet radiant, draws all of humanity back to a single point, the meeting place between smallness and infinity. And at that intersection, people realized, wonder is not distant, but a truth shining right before our eyes. In February 2026, in the days following Atlas's reappearance, observatories worldwide released streams of new data. Spectrographic systems recorded signals never seen before. Atlas's light was not mere reflection, but carried steady pulses, like the slow heartbeat of the cosmos itself. Every 137 seconds, a faint flicker would flare, never strong enough to shake the heavens, but enough to leave scientists stunned. "This cannot be random," a specialist in Geneva whispered. And the laboratory fell into silence, as if everyone were listening to their own heartbeat echo in the dark. These pulses were not just data points, they felt like greetings from a far horizon, inviting humanity into a music we had never heard before. Scientific journals rushed to publish the discovery. Popular media splashed headlines, "Atlas can sing." For the public, after months drenched in fear, the moment burst open like a revelation. Few cared what physical mechanism caused it. They only felt they had been handed a gift, proof that the universe was not mute. At press conferences, many scientists could not hide their emotions. A young astronomer in California said with a breaking voice, "I once dreamed of hearing the universe speak, and now that dream has come true." A Japanese professor bowed his head, eyes glistening. This is the moment when every number, every formula, must give way to gratitude. We are so small, yet granted the blessing to see, to hear. Everywhere, communities embraced Atlas's pulse, as though it were a festival. In Rome, church bells rang every 137 seconds, becoming a vast symphony of resonance. In Brazil, thousands gathered on Copacabana beach, releasing lanterns into the sea one wave every 137 seconds. In Seoul, young musicians composed melodies around the strange rhythm, calling it the Song of Atlas. For a brief moment, humanity beat in time with the silent heart of a distant celestial traveler. Even more astonishing, particle detectors reported the presence of an element not yet classified, something close to nickel, but with a resonance all its own. Some researchers named it Dream Nickel because it appeared fragile, surfacing only when Atlas passed through the sun's corona. The discovery left the scientific community breathless. If true, Atlas carried within it a form of matter beyond the known periodic table. The public did not grasp the details, but they understood one thing: the universe still held mysteries we had never even imagined. And knowing that such wonders existed was enough to stir gratitude. Gratitude for being born in this age. Gratitude for eyes, ears, and hands, able to record, to remember, to pass it on to the generations that follow. In those days, no one asked anymore whether Atlas was friend or foe, where it came from, or what it wanted. People simply cherished each moment of its presence, the way one might honor the quiet bloom of a flower or a single drop of morning dew. A poet in India wrote, "Atlas has taught us that some things do not need explanation, only the grace of being witnessed, and the gratitude of having seen them." As night fell, cities glowed in artificial light, yet far above, Atlas still shimmered, sending out its steady heartbeat. And billions of people, whenever they looked up, felt the same truth. Wonder is not some distant greatness, but a fleeting, tender moment when we are allowed to be grateful simply for being alive to see it. By February 2026, as Atlas's new data spread across the globe, a subtle transformation began to unfold in humanity's collective mind. It was no longer just astonishment, no longer mere excitement, but something entirely different: reverence. Reverence for existence itself, reverence for Earth's fragility, and reverence for every fleeting moment of being alive in an age where the miraculous had become real. In universities, instead of fiery debates, people began hosting open forums where science and philosophy sat side by side. A physicist at Harvard admitted, "Atlas is not only a scientific challenge, it reminds us that some questions should not be rushed toward answers, they should be listened to and honored." Students sat quietly, not out of confusion, but because they could feel the humility woven into every word. In religious communities, the message shifted as well. Instead of preaching apocalypse, many preachers began to speak of gratitude. In a small church in Mexico, a priest lifted an image of Atlas before his congregation and said, "Let us give thanks that we were chosen to witness this. Do not take it as a warning, take it as a gift." And the chapel filled not with weeping, but with song. Across Africa, many indigenous tribes created new ceremonies, weaving their traditional dances into the 137-second rhythm of Atlas. They called it the Dance of Gratitude. Children spun in circles, elders raised their voices in song, and in the firelight, their eyes glowed, not with fear, but with pride at being part of a story greater than themselves. Artists, too, could not stand aside. Paintings of Atlas bloomed across the world, but no longer in the dark and violent hues of fear. Instead, canvases glowed with gentle tones. Atlas as a heart, Atlas as a flower, Atlas as a tear of the cosmos falling to remind humanity to slow down. A sculptor in Florence unveiled a piece called Gift, a metal arc tracing Atlas's orbit, placed in the square so that anyone could touch it and whisper a quiet thank you. This shift reached politics and society as well. Climate conferences, once thick with arguments, suddenly took on a new atmosphere. A delegate from a small island nation stood and declared, "Atlas has shown us the fragility of cosmic order. If we cannot honor Earth, how can we claim to honor Atlas?" The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. Within families, the change was even more intimate. Parents told their children about Atlas not with anxious voices, but with awe. Children grew up believing they were living in an age of wonder, an age where science was not dry calculation, but beauty, deserving of reverence. A young girl in Korea wrote in her diary, "I want to become an astronomer, not to explain Atlas, but to thank Atlas. Because the fine fold potters of the Inji, instroning watching grassed." On February nights, while Atlas still shimmered faintly in the distance, billions of people tilted their heads skyward. No one asks anymore, "Is it a weapon?" or "What message does it carry?" They only whispered a single phrase: "Thank you. Thank you for being alive in this moment. Thank you for witnessing the miraculous." And in that whisper, humanity for the first time felt not only small before the universe, but held, cherished within its invisible embrace. By late February 2026, as Atlas continued its journey drifting farther from the sun, its light still lingered faintly in Earth's skies. Delicate streaks, fragile yet steadfast, were captured by telescopes, like the fading breath of a traveler who had paused only briefly before moving on. Humanity understood that this moment would not last, that one day Atlas would vanish completely from sight. But it was precisely this finitude that made the wonder even greater. Across the world, farewell ceremonies took shape. In London, thousands gathered along the Thames, holding up small mirrors to catch and reflect Atlas's final glow. In Peru, indigenous villagers climbed into the Andes, lit fires, and sang ancient songs, treating Atlas as a heavenly guest, offering blessings before departing. In Northern Europe, children flew kites strung with LED lights, letting them soar high, as if trying to stitch Earth to that faraway orbit. Everywhere, the feeling was the same: gratitude for having lived in this moment. Even scientists, long accustomed to the cold neutrality of numbers, spoke differently now. In conferences, they no longer presented only data, but shared their emotions. A researcher in Berlin wrote, "Atlas has taught us humility. We thought we understood the cosmos, yet it gifted us a wonder to remind us that we are still only students." In Tokyo, a veteran astronomer wept at the end of his lecture. "All my life I have looked at the sky, but never before did the sky look back at me. Atlas did that." This sense of reverence spilled into every corner of daily life. In schools, children drew pictures of Atlas smiling, not burning in anger. In hospitals, terminal cancer patients asked to see images of Atlas one last time, regarding it as the most beautiful farewell they could receive. In homes, parents told their children, "Before you complain, remember that we once had Atlas. It proves that beauty exists even in darkness." Gradually, Atlas transcended its role as a celestial body. It became a shared spiritual heritage of humanity. People began printing its orbit in textbooks, sculpting it into art, and weaving it into liturgies and songs. Atlas was no longer a question demanding an answer, but a story to be retold. The story of a year, 2026, when all of humanity looked up together, held its breath together, and together spoke two simple words: "Thank you." On the final night, when Atlas was still bright enough to glimpse, millions around the world turned off their lights and stood silently beneath the sky. No one could be sure what they were really seeing, only a faint streak dimming into nothingness. And yet, in its disappearance, something remained, a quiet shift within each human heart. From that moment, they no longer saw the universe as an empty void, but as a vast home, where wonder is always waiting, so long as we remember to look up. Atlas departed, but wonder remained. It left behind not only data stored in computers, but an imprint in the collective memory of humankind. It taught people how to revere the fragility of life, the beauty of the unknown, and the sacredness of the present moment. And in every heart, a quiet seed of gratitude took root, ready to grow across generations. It was then that humanity realized, sometimes the universe does not need to send messages in words. A single streak of light passing overhead is enough to become a lifetime's lesson. And from that lesson, humanity prepared to enter a new chapter where deeper philosophies of existence, memory, and the future would begin to unfold. March 2026. Atlas had slipped free from the blazing arms of the solar corona and was now drifting quietly into the distance, leaving behind a trail of strange signals. International observatories released the new data simultaneously, and once again, the world fell into collective breathlessness. No longer only wonder, but a depth of mystery. The steady 137-second pulses, once thought to be stable, began to shift. In many measurements, the intervals stretched or shortened, as if Atlas were adjusting its own breathing. Scientists called it subtle instability. But in the imagination of the public, it was something else entirely, a kind of light code. The question spread across research labs and cafes alike: is Atlas trying to speak to us? Spectral charts appeared on the front pages of dozens of major newspapers, like strange sheet music no one had ever heard before. In New York, a street artist turned Atlas's pulses into an electronic score and broadcast it across the giant screens of Times Square. Thousands stood silent, eyes closed, letting themselves drift into the haunting rhythm. Some wept without knowing why, only that they had touched something beyond words. In laboratories, research teams strained to decode it. A group in Tokyo suggested the variable pulses might be Atlas conversing with Aegis 9, though Aegis 9 was already beyond view. Another team in Germany argued the rhythm could be a complex response to the sun's magnetic field, yet the deeper they analyzed, the less it made sense. Yesterday's charts no longer matched today's, as if Atlas were deliberately avoiding being caught, and it was this very ambiguity that fascinated the public even more. Thousands of musical compositions built on Atlas's pulse flooded YouTube and Spotify. Artists layered the signal with ocean waves, with falling rain, with the sound of a heartbeat. Strangely, everything fit, as if Atlas carried within it the universal frequency of life. People whispered, "Maybe the universe has music, and Atlas is its silent musician." In Brazil, a street festival recreated Atlas's rhythm with drums and light. Every 137 seconds, a thunderous beat rolled through the crowd, and thousands leapt together in dance. In Kenya, tribal communities turned the pulses into a new ritual, calling it the Dance of the Star Guest. Children chanted Atlas's name, circling bonfires, their eyes glowing in the night. Even the skeptics could not resist. A Harvard scientist admitted, "Perhaps we are projecting too much, but I must confess, when I see those pulses, I feel as though someone is knocking at the door of my imagination." On March 14, Atlas's signal was broadcast live across the globe. Billions sat in darkness, watching the flickering points of light on their screens. No one called it a celestial object anymore. They called it the silent storyteller, and the less its tale was understood, the more captivating it became. In that moment, humanity once again lifted its gaze, but this time, not only to look, to listen. Atlas was no longer a stranger. It had become a mysterious guide, beckoning us deeper into the labyrinth of the cosmos, and humanity, instead of fearing, felt a rare sensation surge within, shivers at the mystery, and joy at being allowed to explore it. In the weeks that followed, as Atlas drifted farther from the sun, the data pouring in grew denser. But instead of providing answers, it only deepened humanity's confusion. Contradictions piled upon contradictions, mysteries upon mysteries, as if Atlas itself were playing hide-and-seek with the human mind. In the Geneva control room, 3 sets of spectral readings flashed on the monitors from 3 separate observatories. The station in South Africa reported unusual infrared emissions, pulsing like breath. Meanwhile, Chile's observatory detected steady blue spectral lines, eerily similar to a laser signal. Yet the Hawaiian station saw nothing at all, only a void, dark and fathomless. 3 reports, 3 truths, 3 puzzle pieces that refused to fit. A scientist muttered under his breath, "Atlas is mocking us." International science conferences turned into vast courtrooms. Some insisted the phenomenon was an undiscovered physical effect. Others argued it was proof of artificial technology. A team in Tokyo proposed that Atlas might contain a superpositional core, a form of matter that changed its properties depending on the angle of observation. The hypothesis sounded like science fiction, but the hall fell silent, then erupted in thunderous applause. While scientists debated fiercely, the public grew even more enthralled. They began calling Atlas the cosmic magician. Social media is filled with memes. Atlas in a wizard's hat, Atlas as a circus performer, Atlas vanishing into shadow only to flare again in light. Rather than discouraging humanity, the contradictions fueled curiosity. If even science doesn't understand it, then surely this is a mystery worth chasing. Distended from X-life, philosophers added another perspective. Atlas is not meant to be understood, it is meant to be felt. They compared it to abstract art. One person sees one shape, another sees something else, and yet both are right, because its value lies in its multiplicity. The phrase, "spread like wildfire," quoted across millions of posts. Some younger scientists pushed further, attempting to model the signals as a kind of language. They assigned symbols to each variation in the pulse sequence and strung them together. One group in California claimed they had translated Atlas into the letters OLTA. No one knew if it was a coincidence or a design, but within hours, the word OTA was everywhere online, reinterpreted as other than Atlas or origins to all. The decoding frenzy turned Atlas from a celestial body into a worldwide riddle. In cafes, students sketched graphs on napkins, debating passionately. Children played Atlas Code, flashing torches in sequences of light and dark. Television networks aired specials titled Atlas, Language of the Star Guest. Viewers watched spectral lines flicker across their screens, shivering and delighted, like children listening to a bedtime tale. Amid the chaos, one truth became undeniable. Atlas had transformed raw, sterile data into a shared emotional experience. Every number, every chart, now stirred, imagination becoming rhythm, becoming language, becoming myth. Humanity, so often weary of lifeless figures and equations, now willingly stayed awake through the night, just to watch a faint spectral line flicker. At a European Space Agency conference, a scientist closed his remarks with a single sentence: "Atlas does not explain itself, it dares us to discover." The hall fell silent, not the silence of disagreement, but of recognition. And in that silence, humanity once again felt it was standing before a newly opened doorway, one that led into a labyrinth, where mystery and science walked side by side, where curiosity itself had become the fuel for imagination's flight. In the days that followed, Atlas was no longer confined to scientific journals or nightly news broadcasts. It seeped into popular culture, becoming a symbol of imagination without boundaries. Each ambiguous discovery only fueled another layer of mystery, and humanity, instead of losing interest, grew ever hungrier to explore. A team of scientists in Switzerland announced that variations in Atlas's pulse patterns might align with the Fibonacci sequence. The world erupted. If true, it meant Atlas was singing in the mathematical harmony of nature. Headlines declared, "Atlas, the interstellar mathematician." Social media flooded with images of sunflowers, seashell spirals, and cyclones all tied to Atlas, as if the universe itself were playing a cosmic puzzle with humankind. Meanwhile, another group in Chile proposed a different theory. Atlas might be a fragment of a lost planet, carrying within it the memory of an entire destroyed world. They called it a cosmic fossil library. The idea struck deep, igniting a haunting curiosity. If Atlas truly carried memories, could there be a way to decode them, to glimpse the echoes of a planet long forgotten? Writers, artists, and even theologians joined the fray. A Polish poet wrote, "Atlas is the mirror of the soul, each pulse a breath of the universe's memory." A South Korean filmmaker began shooting Messenger of the Stars, a story in which Atlas was portrayed as a messenger sent to awaken humanity's collective unconscious. In India, a spiritual teacher proclaimed that Atlas was the chariot of light from ancient scripture, sent to test humankind's spirit. Curiously, the contradictions did not cancel one another out in the public's mind. People believed Atlas could be a fragment, a messenger, and a cosmic musician all at once. Its multiplicity only deepened the fascination. Like a kaleidoscope, each turn revealed a new vision, radiant, elusive, impossible to hold. On the internet, the movement to decode Atlas became a global fever. Forums sprouted, algorithms were written, and theories exchanged. Some groups insisted the pulses formed an ancient binary code waiting to be unlocked. Others claimed they mapped a path to a cosmic doorway. Still others, more romantic, saw it as a love poem from the universe. No single answer prevailed, but that hardly mattered. Atlas had become a riddle that required no solution, only the joy of unraveling. Veteran scientists often warned, "We need evidence, not just imagination." Yet even they, in candid interviews, confessed to being enthralled. An elderly physicist at Cambridge chuckled, "I don't believe Atlas is a messenger, but each time I see the data, my heart races like a child's." On the March nights, when Atlas slowly receded into the distance, millions still gathered outdoors. They were not waiting for answers anymore. They came to live inside the blend of wonder and mystery. They told stories, sketched symbols, played music to match the pulse. In those moments, humanity was not merely observing a celestial body. They were participants in a grand game set in motion by the universe itself. A game where the reward was not truth, but the endless fire of curiosity. Late March 2026. Atlas had drifted farther away, now no more than a faint speck of light in the sky. Yet, paradoxically, as it faded in the lenses of telescopes, the imprint it left on humanity's mind only grew brighter. People realized that Atlas would soon vanish from sight, but its very absence was what transformed it into a permanent symbol of mystery. In Geneva, research institutes decided to release all raw data to the public, inviting citizens everywhere to join the decoding effort. The Citizen Atlas movement spread quickly. From professional scientists to high school students, anyone could download the data, run analyses, and propose theories. A 4-year-old boy in Canada discovered a strange repeating pattern and was immediately invited to speak on live television. His voice trembled but carried conviction. Maybe Atlas is teaching us that every truth has more than one angle. We need to learn to see from many sides. The audience erupted in applause. Many wept. Major cities began hosting cultural events inspired by Atlas. In New York, the Science Museum opened an exhibition titled Whispers of Atlas, where visitors entered a dark room lit only by pulses flashing every 137 seconds. In Tokyo, a symphony orchestra performed the Atlas Symphony, blending classical instruments with the recorded signals from space. The audience sat in complete silence throughout, many feeling as though they were beneath the open sky, listening to the universe narrate its own story. In Cairo, mosques held special prayers, treating Atlas as a sign of the sacred, a reminder that God's presence could still be glimpsed through mysteries that defy explanation. On social media, the number Atlas mystery trend flourished. People tattooed Atlas's orbit onto their arms, printed T-shirts with the 137-second rhythm, and set the spectral signal as their phone ringtone. No one thought of Atlas as merely a celestial body anymore. It had entered daily life as a spiritual emblem, a collective story humanity was telling and living together. Even so, the scientific community remained cautious. Researchers reminded the world, Atlas has not answered anything. Everything remains a mystery. Instead of sparking frustration, this honesty was met with smiles. People had learned that to live alongside mystery was itself a form of happiness. Not every question demanded an answer. Sometimes, the search itself was what gave life meaning. A sociologist wrote in a journal, Atlas has shifted humanity's attitude. Before, we always demanded quick answers. Now we are learning patience, learning to value ambiguity, learning to accept mystery as a companion. The reflection was shared millions of times, embraced as the summary of a collective journey. On the final night, when Atlas was still bright enough to be seen, millions across the planet turned off their lights and gathered under the open sky. No one spoke aloud, only whispers. Remember this moment. They saw little more than a faint streak slowly vanishing. Yet within that vanishing, something else appeared. A renewed faith that the universe still held countless secrets, and that humanity would continue to pursue them with boundless curiosity and quiet gratitude. Atlas moved away, but its legacy did not fade. It left behind more than data stored in computers. It carved itself into the collective memory of humankind. It became a bridge between science and myth, between data and dream, between intellect and emotion. And in that fusion, the world prepared to step into a new chapter, where deeper philosophical reflections would begin to unfold about existence, memory, and humanity's responsibility before the vast cosmos. April 2026. As spring spread across the northern hemisphere, the night sky took on a strange emptiness. Atlas, the strange visitor that had once enthralled and unsettled humanity, had now drifted so far that only the most powerful telescopes could glimpse it as a faint blur. On observation screens, its image grew dimmer by the day, like the fading breath of a flame about to die. Yet, paradoxically, the fainter it became to the eye, the more vivid it grew in the mind, a haunting silhouette, seeding humanity with a restless wave of unease. At international scientific conferences, where once fiery debates had dominated, a heavy gloom now prevailed. Giant screens displayed tangled graphs and models, but instead of clarity, they revealed only contradictions. A scientist in Geneva finally confessed before hundreds of colleagues, "After all of this, we are no closer to the truth. Atlas is a labyrinth. The deeper we walk, the more lost we become." The hall fell silent. Some bowed their heads, others stared blankly, their faces etched with despair. What had begun as a pursuit of knowledge was turning into a confrontation with the limits of human understanding. The media seized this despair and magnified it into a storm. Headlines struck like hammer blows. Atlas, a missed message? Has humanity failed to decode it? Will we ever get a second chance? Talk shows ran endlessly, seating experts on hot panels, but rather than offering reassurance, they unsettled audiences further by posing relentless questions. If Atlas was a warning, have we come too late? If it was an opportunity, has it already slipped away? Viewers sat before their screens with tight chests and heavy hearts. Anxiety spread like an invisible contagion. In everyday life, this unease became tangible. A mother in Lyon confessed in her diary, "Each night I look up, and all I see is emptiness. Atlas is gone. I fear we've let slip the most important gift the universe ever sent us." In Sao Paulo, an anonymous engineer's voice quavered on the radio. "We used every tool, exhausted every method, yet Atlas remained silent. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's ultimate helplessness." His words were replayed widely, deepening the collective sense of fragility. Psychologists began reporting a new condition they called Atlas syndrome. Sufferers lived in constant tension, plagued by insomnia, haunted by the feeling that something monumental had been lost and nothing could be done to recover it. This helplessness became a common shadow stretching across individuals and communities alike. And yet, within this dark canvas, faint sparks of resilience glimmered. In Nairobi, a group of young students worked by lamplight, poring over scraps of data long abandoned by major institutes. They believed a hidden undercurrent still lingered within the scattered fluctuations. In Canada, the 14-year-old boy who had once spotted a peculiar pattern in Atlas's signals continued his daily science journal, sketching graphs on squared paper, recording intuitions as fragile as they were passionate. He wrote, "Maybe Atlas never left us. Maybe it is still here, we just haven't yet learned to look the right way." Stories of these small acts of persistence spread quickly, becoming unexpected beacons of hope. Images of Kenyan students huddled around an aging laptop, or of the Canadian boy leaning by his window to redraw faint signals, were shared millions of times. The online community affectionately dubbed them the keepers of Atlas's flame. It was these quiet keepers who rekindled something in the human heart, a fragile hope. Not a blazing bonfire, but a flickering ember bright enough to hold people back from surrendering to the darkness of despair. And in that fragile light, many realized a truth. Sometimes a tiny spark is more precious than a roaring torch, because it proves that there is still a reason to move forward. Atlas, in its steadfast silence, had left behind a vast void. Yet within that void, humanity discovered itself, weak, helpless, yet still capable of resilience, still able to guard a sliver of faith, even when every dataset denied it. And perhaps that was Atlas's truest message, not an answer, but a trial, a test to see whether humankind could cling to hope in its most fragile hour. May 2026. Atlas drifted farther away, shrinking until it appeared only as faint specks on orbital tracking systems. Even the most powerful observatories now sent back only rare, fragmented scraps of data. Yet instead of easing humanity's preoccupation, this fading presence spread unease wider than ever before. Like a silent illness, it seeped into every community, every family, every quiet conversation. In Washington, an emergency session of the Space Security Committee convened under suffocating tension. Experts presented findings that many of Atlas's data streams no longer fit traditional physical models. A congressman asked coldly, "If this truly was a warning, have we already missed it? And if danger is coming, do we have any time left to prepare?" The room froze in silence, then erupted in clashing arguments. No one had an answer. The helplessness only deepened the fear. Across global media, pessimism became a commodity. Headlines shouted, "Atlas, a warning in the dark, and what are we really facing?" Late-night radio shows filled with trembling voices from callers. A man in Italy choked out, "Every night, I look at the sky and see emptiness. I don't know if I fear for myself or for my children, but I feel the future is closing." His words echoed through millions of ears, layering new anxiety upon the old. Even within science, helplessness spread. After months of analysis, most major research centers announced that they had no new results to report. Budgets were slashed, and laboratories shut down. Young researchers sank into despair. An astronomer in Chile posted on social media, "Atlas is like a book missing its final page. We read and reread, guessing at the ending, but we will never know." The post drew millions of likes, resonating with an entire generation of scientists brought to their knees. And yet, amid the gloom, small sparks of persistence still glowed. In Tokyo, a group of students formed their own independent lab, pooling money to buy data from commercial observatories. They worked in a cramped room under a hand-painted banner that read, "Atlas has never been silent. We just haven't learned how to listen." A photo of them went viral, moving people to tears. In Argentina, an amateur astronomer with a homemade telescope detected a faint oscillation, curiously aligned with a NASA dataset. Though unconfirmed by the scientific establishment, the discovery stirred the public's imagination. They called him the dreamer of the skies. Images of him sitting alone beneath the vast Patagonian night, eyes fixed on a dim point of light, became a symbol of fragile hope that even solitary efforts could keep the dream of discovery alive. Online, communities named Keep Searching Atlas sprouted across the globe. Members from different nations shared data, traded theories, and plotted graphs with free software. They lacked advanced laboratories, they lacked funding, but they carried a common belief. Atlas still had something left to say. One member wrote, "We cannot give up, because as long as even one person keeps searching, hope stays alive." The words were pinned at the top of the forum, a compass guiding thousands of participants. These efforts, fragile and uncertain though they were, planted a new kind of balance in humanity's heart. Fear still lingered, helplessness still weighed heavily, but alongside them was the sense that the mystery had not yet closed. Atlas, though receding, glowed like a faint ember at the edge of the horizon, a reminder that humanity must never abandon faith, no matter how fragile. In that tension between despair and hope, between paralysis and persistence, the world learned another lesson, that sometimes the value of a journey lies not in its answers, but in refusing to surrender the question. Atlas had given humanity no solution, but it had forced them to keep walking in the dark, carrying hope like a small candle, protecting the flame so their hearts would not fall cold. June 2026. Atlas had drifted so far that even the most powerful telescopes could barely make out a faint streak lost in cosmic dust. In its official report, ESA confirmed that direct observation of Atlas would cease within weeks. The announcement was broadcast worldwide, and once again, a heavy unease spread across the globe. People felt as though something precious had been lost before they had even understood what it truly was. A journalist wrote, "Atlas arrived and shook the entire planet. Then it slipped away in silence, leaving behind questions that will never be answered. Its departure feels like a door closing before us, while we are still trembling on the threshold." Millions shared the article because it perfectly captured the fragile uncertainty weighing on the world. In cities, people began organizing farewell nights for Atlas. In Madrid, thousands spread blankets across the square, staring up at the empty sky in wordless sorrow. In Seoul, a young band performed a ballad titled "Don't Go Too Far, Atlas." In Cape Town, graffiti artists painted walls with images of Atlas as a torn heart drifting into darkness. Everywhere, humanity found ways to release its unease. In the scientific community, helplessness still lingered. Many research projects were shut down, and countless scientists abandoned the subject, turning back to more practical work. Some even admitted defeat openly. "We have not decoded anything, except our own smallness." Yet, alongside resignation, small groups persisted. They no longer expected quick answers. They only sought to keep the flame alive. A young researcher in Japan wrote, "Atlas may vanish from the sky, but it will remain alive in the data. We will learn how to listen again until we can understand even a fragment." More importantly, a subtle shift began to ripple through society. People gradually learned to accept that some questions cannot be answered immediately. The anxiety did not disappear, but it transformed into a quiet determination. Universities introduced Atlas into their curriculum, not as a puzzle demanding a solution, but as a lesson in patience and resilience. Artists kept creating, but no longer depicted Atlas as a looming threat, rather as a mysterious friend who visited and departed, leaving behind a story of hope. Within families, parents told their children about Atlas not in trembling tones, but in warmth. There was a time when the whole world looked up to the sky together, waiting, hoping. And the most precious gift was not an answer, but the moment we realized we were not alone in our curiosity. Children grew up with that memory, a seed planted in their hearts, teaching them that even in darkness, light could still be found. Hope, fragile, faint, yet resilient, kept humanity from collapsing under worry. It taught them how to carry their anxiety as part of the journey, rather than as a weight that crushed them. Atlas had gone far away, but it left behind an invisible legacy, a reminder that helplessness does not equal failure, and hope does not need to blaze brightly to matter. Even a single flicker can still guide the way. When the observatories transmitted Atlas's final signal, millions watched the live broadcast. They saw a small shimmering dot blink once, then fade into nothingness. No applause, no cheers, only silence. And in that silence, a quiet belief whispered through hearts. We will meet again. Elated, Dave smiled. That was how humanity closed the Atlas chapter in its collective memory, with lingering unease, with unresolved helplessness, yet also with a fragile hope strong enough to carry them forward, to keep looking up, to keep believing that wonder still waits ahead. July 2026. Atlas had drifted so far that it disappeared from nearly all telescopes, reduced to faint specks swallowed by cosmic dust. The final images preserved in NASA's databases were little more than trembling dots, too fragile to form a clear shape. And yet, paradoxically, as Atlas withdrew from the sky, it sank deeper into the memory and imagination of humanity. People no longer followed it with their eyes, but with haunting contemplation that stretched on day after day. At scientific conferences, the atmosphere had completely shifted. No longer fueled by data and competing hypotheses, the gatherings took on a philosophical tone. In Berlin, a renowned philosopher opened a symposium with a question: why do we tremble more before the silence of Atlas than before its data? The room fell silent. No one could provide a certain answer. A Harvard professor added, perhaps silence itself is the answer. It forces us to look inward, rather than only outward at the cosmos. His words rang out like a collective confession. Atlas was no longer merely a celestial body. It had become a mirror, reflecting the essence of humanity. In society at large, fear had never truly disappeared. Many admitted they lost sleep not because Atlas still existed, but because it had gone. They feared that humankind had missed its only chance to touch a message from the beyond. Psychologists began calling this condition post-Atlas syndrome. Those who suffered from it often experienced anxiety, existential crises, and a suffocating sense of smallness before an endless universe. A French journalist wrote, Atlas was like a symphony cut short, ending right at its crescendo, leaving behind a silence that takes your breath away. We tremble not because of what it said, but because of what it never said. Alongside that fear came an unprecedented hunger for meaning. In New York, thousands gathered in Central Park not to peer through telescopes, but to sit in silence, meditate, and listen to their own minds. In Delhi, a group of philosophy students drafted a manifesto. Atlas does not need to speak. It leaves us with the chance to answer the greatest question ourselves. Who are we in this universe? The text was quickly translated into dozens of languages, spreading across the globe as a rallying cry for a generation desperate for truth. In art, Atlas was reimagined in countless forms, as a lantern suspended in the void, as the heart of the cosmos, as a mirror holding the souls of all beings. Paintings, music, and films all poured forth, united by a single theme, the relentless urge to seek meaning. In churches, temples, and mosques, the name of Atlas was spoken as a testament to mystery. Sermons no longer circled apocalypse but around humility and gratitude for having witnessed such a moment. Within families, parents told their children, Atlas teaches us that some things cannot be controlled, but that does not make us weaker. It forces us to learn how to stand firm in the dark. Children listened with wide, shining eyes, as if they understood that Atlas was not just the story of a celestial traveler, but a lesson in patience and courage. Even scientists admitted they had been changed. An astronomer in Chile wrote, I once believed science existed, only to find answers. But Atlas showed me that science, too, must sometimes bow before silence. A colleague in Canada added, we tremble because we do not know, but it is precisely that unknowing which can become the source of humility and of strength. And so, Atlas no longer existed as a physical object. It became a scripture of contemplation for humanity, a book without words, where each person was compelled to write their own response. It left fear behind, yes, but it also planted within humankind a deeper yearning for meaning. No other celestial body had ever done that, and perhaps that is the greatest legacy Atlas left behind. August 2026. After weeks without any new data from Atlas, the silence of the cosmos grew heavy, like a veil draped across the planet. And yet, within that silence, humanity began transforming its fear into a different kind of quest, a search for meaning that reached beyond ordinary measurements. In Geneva, a special conference was convened. Not only astronomers, but also philosophers, theologians, writers, and artists. On stage, an elderly philosopher raised his voice. Atlas has forced us to ask questions, not about it, but about ourselves. Who are we in this vast picture? If a celestial body can make the entire world tremble, is it because we have never truly understood ourselves? The question rippled outward like a wave, no longer contained within the hall, but echoing into minds everywhere. Across Asia, many religious and spiritual communities began to see Atlas as a symbol of awakening. No longer a herald of disaster, it became a reminder that humanity must rediscover its own essence. Collective meditation gatherings multiplied, from Buddhist temples in Kyoto to yoga centers in India. People no longer prayed for Atlas to return, they prayed to find answers within themselves. In the scientific world, though many voices remained skeptical, a new generation surged forward with fresh hunger. They did not merely want to know what Atlas was, they wanted to use the story of Atlas to redefine the place of humankind in the universe. At a symposium in Argentina, a young researcher declared, "Atlas may vanish, but it has placed a mirror in our hands. And when I look into it, I no longer see myself only as a gatherer of data, but as a being longing for meaning." Universities around the globe began weaving Atlas into their curricula, not in astronomy, but in philosophy, sociology, and the arts. At Oxford, a professor lectured, "Atlas is a lesson in fragility and the limits of knowledge. It teaches us that science and art must walk together if we are to open the door to meaning." Students listened in reverent silence, as though they were taking part in a ritual rather than a lecture. In everyday society, conversations shift tone. No longer did people ask, "Was Atlas a weapon?" or "Where did it come from?" They began to ask, "If we can be moved so deeply by a distant celestial body, then what truly makes us human?" An elderly woman in Mexico said in an interview, "I have lived 70 years, but this is the first time I have seen the entire world look in the same direction together." Perhaps Atlas existed only to show us that. Artists continued to channel the emotion into their work. In Paris, a sculptor created the Bearer of Questions, a marble figure gazing upward, eyes hollow, but pierced by light, representing the emptiness Atlas left behind and the surge of yearning it awakened. In Seoul, a young filmmaker released the documentary The Silence of Atlas, blending scientific data with poetic narration. Millions watched, as if searching for a shared answer, yet alongside the inspiration, fear persisted. Each time people faced the silence, they also faced their own smallness. Many slipped into existential crises, asking, "If we can never understand Atlas, can we ever truly understand ourselves?" The question was both haunting and compelling. It did not paralyze humanity. Instead, it pushed them into a new journey, a search for meaning that transcended individual life, transcended even this era. As summer waned, Atlas became memory. But it was not a fading memory. It was carved into the collective soul, a silence that once made humanity tremble, and from that trembling, a hunger for meaning stronger than ever before. From that hunger, people began to understand that Atlas may have vanished, but the question it left behind would walk with them for generations to come. September 2026. Atlas had vanished from every astronomical chart, surviving only in data archives and in humanity's collective memory. Yet paradoxically, once its light was gone from the sky, people saw Atlas more clearly than ever, not with their eyes, but with their minds. Its absence opened a vast space for reflection. At the United Nations, a special forum called The Legacy of Atlas was held. No one spoke about orbits or spectra anymore. Everything revolved around a single question: how has Atlas changed us? An African philosopher declared, "Atlas is a lesson in helplessness. But from that helplessness, we found strength. Only when we recognize our smallness do we begin to hunger for meaning." The hall fell silent, then erupted into the longest applause it had ever known. Across societies, communities began to form around the memory of Atlas. In Canada, a museum displayed the old data and images, but most visitors didn't come for the information, they came to experience the silence. They sat before screens showing flickering dots of light, eyes glistening. One visitor whispered, "I don't understand any of it." but I feel present. In Brazil, street festivals wove Atlas into dance and music, not as a scientific phenomenon, but as a symbol of humanity's yearning for meaning in everyday life. Artists continued to shape Atlas into a new myth of the age. An Italian novelist published When the Universe Fell Silent, a story about humanity learning to find hope even without answers. In Seoul, a young painter unveiled a massive canvas titled The Map of Silence. It depicted Atlas as a solitary point of light against a pitch-black cosmos, surrounded by thousands of human faces gazing upward. The work brought millions to tears, for it struck the deepest chord of existential fear, while awakening an equally powerful thirst for meaning. Religions, too, found in Atlas a shared symbol. At a ceremony in the Vatican, the Pope proclaimed, "We do not know what Atlas is, but we know it compelled humanity to search together, and perhaps, in that very act of seeking together, we touch the meaning God wished to grant us." In India, spiritual teachers preached that the soul was the mirror of the soul, reminding humankind that meaning does not lie outside, but within the journey of seeking itself. Within families, Atlas became a story retold on quiet evenings. Parents told their children, "There was once a time when the whole world looked to the sky together, trembling, hoping. We found no answer, but we learned how to wait and how to trust." The children did not feel disappointed. They smiled, as though they had been handed a spiritual inheritance more precious than any scientific discovery. By the end of the year, as the world turned toward new events, Atlas was still remembered. No one expected its return, yet no one forgot. Atlas had become a symbol of an era when humanity learned to accept not knowing, and in that acceptance, people found a new meaning, that life does not require answers to be valuable, it only requires the awareness that the search itself makes us more human. A sociologist concluded, "Atlas did not bring us a message, it was the message that meaning is not a destination, but the path we dare to walk, even when it is filled with fear." And so, Atlas, the silent celestial body, left behind an invisible scripture for humankind. It sowed fear, but also longing. It gave no answers, yet compelled humanity to search. And in that journey, humanity learned one profound truth. Meaning does not lie in decoding Atlas, but in daring to contemplate ourselves. October 2026. Atlas had completely vanished from every astronomical chart. The great telescopes recorded only a blur of cosmic dust, with no trace of its once brilliant presence. After months of uproar, unease, and relentless searching, the world now entered a different state, a profound stillness. It was as if, after a stormy symphony, the orchestra had stopped abruptly, leaving a long silence that made every listener tremble. Within that stillness, humanity began to turn inward, to examine its own life. In New York, the crowds that had once gathered beneath the screens of Times Square to watch Atlas now sat quietly along the banks of the Hudson, watching the river flow in silence. In Tokyo, scientists who had spent months chasing data wandered into Shinjuku Park to watch petals fall, as though relearning how to see the simplicity of life. In Cairo, clerics preached during prayer. When the universe falls silent, the human heart finally learns to speak. The anxiety that had once spread across the globe did not disappear, but it transformed. People no longer asked in desperation, "What is Atlas? Where did it come from?" Instead, they asked gentler questions. How did we live while Atlas passed by? Did we know how to cherish each moment of its presence? This quiet reflection spread like an underground current, slowly changing the way people lived, not loudly, but persistently. In the arts, silence became an inexhaustible source of inspiration. A German composer wrote a symphony titled Echo of Silence, in which the entire orchestra stopped playing for exactly 137 seconds in the middle of the piece. In that pause, the audience held its breath, transported back to the moment when Atlas pulsed its mysterious rhythm across the sky. In Seoul, a young filmmaker created a short film called After the Guest Star Departed, with no dialogue, only ordinary scenes. Children laughing, the elderly gazing at the moon, farmers sowing seeds in their fields. The film won international awards because it revealed that Atlas did not belong only to the heavens, but also to the small, ordinary details of human life. Religion and spirituality also found new language in the silence of Atlas. At the Vatican, the Pope preached, "Atlas has gone, but it leaves us a test. Will we dare to live with the silence of the universe without losing faith? In India, spiritual teachers called Atlas's disappearance the mirror moment, a reminder that answers are not outside, but within. Across Africa, tribes created a new dance called the Shadow of Atlas, performed without music, guided only by the heartbeat of each dancer, as an expression of harmony with the universe in silence. Even the scientific world, long accustomed to the pressure of publishing results, changed its tone. An astronomer in Chile admitted, "Atlas left no final data, but in that absence, it forced us to relearn patience and humility." A colleague in the United States wrote, "The void Atlas left behind is not failure. It is part of the answer that there are things we must learn to accept, not control." In family life, Atlas was retold as a moral story. Parents told their children, "Once, the whole world looked up to the sky together, sharing fear, sharing hope. Even though we received no answer, we learned how to stand firm." The children listened, not disappointed, but feeling they had inherited something priceless, the ability to find meaning even in silence. And so, Atlas was no longer a celestial body to be observed, but a symbol of stillness. Humanity, in this quiet, learned how to breathe more slowly, walk more slowly, and listen more deeply. Out of that silence emerged another kind of strength, not from answers, but from the courage to face questions without trembling. And within the stillness, a new light began to flicker, a fragile yet steadfast hope, whispering that this silence itself was opening the way toward a new awakening. November 2026. The world had begun to grow accustomed to a sky without Atlas, yet instead of fading into oblivion, its absence nurtured a different feeling, a fragile hope, rising gently out of silence. Like a candle that becomes more precious the darker the night, humanity began to discover light in small, seemingly ordinary things. In many great cities, new communities emerged. They called themselves the Silence Clubs. Members did not argue or trade complex theories. Instead, they gathered once a week to sit quietly for exactly 137 seconds, recreating the mysterious pulse of Atlas. Many said that in those pauses they felt a profound, invisible connection, not only with one another, but with the universe itself. A man in Berlin whispered, "I no longer see Atlas, but I see myself, and that gives me hope." In art, hope became a new current. A young painter in Mexico unveiled a series titled Green Shoots After Darkness, where Atlas appeared only as a faint streak of light, but under that faint glow, plants, people, and cities flourished. The exhibition, displayed in the central square, drew tens of thousands of visitors. Many stood silently, tears streaming down their faces. In Australia, a composer wrote a symphony called Echoes of Hope, ending with a chord that faded slowly into silence. Yet within that silence, audiences felt their hearts illuminated. In society, education itself began to change. Many schools wove the story of Atlas into their moral curriculum. Teachers did not lecture about astronomy but asked their students, "Why do you think Atlas made the whole world look up together? What did we learn from that moment?" The children's answers were innocent yet powerful. "Because we don't want to be alone. Because we need hope." Those words, simple as they were, startled the adults, as though waking them from a long sleep. Religions also found deeper lessons in Atlas. In Jerusalem, a rabbi preached, "Atlas left no message, yet its silence itself became the message, that we must seek the light within, not only wait for light from beyond." In Nepal, a group of monks held a special prayer ceremony, not to ask for Atlas's return, but to pray that humanity would learn to live each day fully. Such rituals did not sow fear, but rather faith, the belief that awakening does not arrive from some far-off phenomenon, but from the choices we make in how we live. Even the scientific world, weighed down for months by the pressure of failure, began to uncover meaning in the void. A young astronomer in Canada wrote in her journal, "I once believed Atlas was a question demanding an answer. Now I see that perhaps Atlas was a test, whether we can remain patient enough to seek meaning even without answers." Her words spread rapidly online, shared millions of times as a new mantra, "Patience is hope." At home, conversations about Atlas no longer carried sadness, but peace. Parents spoke to their children in gentle tones. Once, the whole world worried together, then learned how to be silent together. And in that silence, we found connection. The children did not feel disappointed. Instead, they felt pride in having lived through that moment. They drew pictures of Atlas on paper but filled the skies with friends, families, and trees, as if they already understood that hope does not reside in distant stars, but in the closeness of life around them. And so, from stillness, a quiet awakening began to take root. Humanity discovered that meaning does not always appear in spectacular events. It can be found in a breath, in a glance, in the touch of a hand. Atlas had departed, but the emptiness it left became fertile ground where seeds of hope could grow. And within that silence, people slowly learned how to step into a new chapter of awareness, to live not only in search of answers, but to nurture the questions themselves, and to grow alongside them. December 2026. A year of turbulence slowly drew to a close. In the night sky, Atlas had vanished completely, leaving no trace. Yet strangely, the emptier the heavens became, the more vividly Atlas appeared in the human mind. The silence after its passing was no longer a void, but a space in which humanity rediscovered something long forgotten, that meaning is not found in grasping, but in daring to live with what cannot be grasped. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower was illuminated for a ceremony called the Night of Silence. Tens of thousands gathered not to cheer, not for fireworks, but simply to stand together in quietness, gazing at the sky. In New York, church bells rang at midnight, not to mark a mass, but to remind people of the moment when the entire world once followed a single point of light. In Kyoto, thousands of lanterns floated along the Kamo River, each carrying a single word: hope, patience, awakening. These lanterns did not try to summon Atlas back, but instead illuminated the path humanity would now walk. Science, art, religion, and daily life began to merge in unexpected ways. A scientist in the U.S. admitted, "I no longer see a clear boundary between data and faith. Atlas taught me that there are silences science cannot fill, and in those silences, we need art, we need spirit." An Italian artist reflected, "Atlas left no perfect image, but it left a feeling, and that feeling is enough to become art's inheritance." Meanwhile, a Tibetan monk simply smiled. Atlas is the greatest meditation humanity has ever undertaken. At a deeper level, people began to understand that Atlas was not an exception, but a reminder that the universe holds countless other mysteries waiting in silence. And rather than fear them, humanity could learn to welcome them. Sociologists called this the cognitive turning point, the moment when humanity ceased living only to explain and began learning to walk alongside what cannot be explained. Within families, the story of Atlas was retold without trembling voices. Instead, parents spoke with warmth and calm. Once, the whole planet waited together for a sign. The sign never arrived. And yet, the miracle was that in the waiting, we found each other. Children did not feel disappointment. They laughed, then asked, "When will we have a new Atlas?" And parents answered, "Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in 100 years. But what matters most is that we will know how to listen." When the phrase "no reading," this awakening unfolded quietly, not marked by scientific discoveries or historic events. It was more like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long night, slow, inevitable, unstoppable. People began to live differently, noticing their breath, cherishing loved ones, and attending to the natural world. They learned to find meaning in simple existence, in daring to hold questions without rushing to resolve them. And in this way, Atlas had fulfilled its mission not by revealing what it was, but by forcing humanity to confront itself. It passed by as a silent visitor, but left behind a planet transformed, a world that had learned silence, learned hope, and above all, learned awakening. At year's end, an old philosopher wrote in his journal, "Atlas left no data, but it left a lesson. Meaning is not in the answer, but in the search. And if we dare to live with mystery, then we already have all we need to grow." And so Atlas, the silent celestial body, became an eternal symbol. It no longer existed in the sky, but in every human heart. It was no longer a question waiting for a reply, but an echo, guiding humanity into a new era, an era of living with mystery, cherishing the journey, and discovering meaning even in silence. Atlas has gone. The telescopes lie silent, laboratories echo with the absence of keystrokes, and the night sky has returned to its familiar face, the ancient constellations humanity has known for thousands of years. Yet within the human heart, an emptiness still reverberates, like the lingering echo of a great symphony that has suddenly ceased. And in that emptiness, we begin to understand Atlas never truly disappeared. It merely shifted from the outer sky into the inner sky of the mind. What Atlas left behind was not data, but silence. It forced us to recognize that the universe does not always respond, and that sometimes silence itself is the greatest answer of all. At first, we trembled before that silence, but then we learned to sit with it. We worried because meaning eluded us, but then we discovered that in the longing for meaning, we became more human than ever. Atlas was like a stranger who knocked on the door, spoke no words, and then slipped quietly away. Yet when it left, the entire house had changed. Walls that once seemed mute now reflected new questions. Rooms once ablaze with numbers now rested in stillness, and in that stillness, humanity heard the sound of its own heartbeat. Perhaps that is the true miracle. Atlas did not give us answers, but compelled us to learn how to live with the questions. During the months of Atlas's presence, we traveled through every emotion: wonder, awe, suspicion, fear, desire, confusion, imagination, and finally, silence. Each emotion was a step in a path of growth. Just as a child must cry, laugh, stumble, and rise again before it can walk, humanity, too, had to pass through every stage before arriving here, to a place where we can accept the silence of the cosmos as part of life itself. In that realization, a simple truth emerged. The meaning was never about discovering what Atlas was. It was about discovering who we are. When the entire planet lifted its gaze to the heavens, borders, languages, and religions dissolved. For one rare moment in history, we were not divided tribes, we were a single species, trembling together before the unknown. That shared vulnerability was itself a form of revelation. Atlas taught us that mystery is not the enemy. We fear what we do not know, but if we dare to walk alongside the unknown, we discover another kind of strength. The strength of humility, of patience, of fragile but unyielding faith. Generations to come will grow up never having seen Atlas, but they will hear the story told by parents, in books, in paintings, in music, in films, and within that story they will not find scientific data, but a moral parable. Once, the whole world waited together. The sign never arrived, but in the waiting we found each other. That is the hope Atlas bequeathed to us. The hope that we can remain connected not through an external answer, but through the inner journey we share. The hope that silence itself can sustain belief. The hope that even when the universe does not speak, we can still write the next chapter of our own story. In the end, Atlas became a symbol not of distance, but of awakening. It reminded us that in a world of noise and chaos, what matters is not always data, speed, or power, but the ability to pause, to listen, to revere existence. So tonight, when you lift your eyes to the sky, you will no longer see Atlas. But remember this: its absence is not a loss. It is an invitation. An invitation to begin your own journey, to contemplate, to hope, to awaken. Atlas has traveled far, but the journey it began continues within every human heart. And if we are brave enough to live with the question, patient enough to embrace the silence, and faithful enough to search for meaning even without an answer, then perhaps Atlas has fulfilled its mission. Because in the end, Atlas was never the answer. It was the question, and the reason we must keep searching, keep growing, and keep hoping.